Chapter 595. The reason why lunatics were called lunatics was because they dared to do it, could do it, and were willing to do things that ordinary people would not even consider. Countless histories had clearly shown one truth. There was only half a step between insanity and stupidity, and similarly, there was only half a step between insanity and wisdom. The flames of war filled the air, and smoke was everywhere. The turmoil that was enough to topple all of Eastern Europe continued to spread. As the longest-serving president in the history of Snow Empire, as the initiator of this war that was enough to be recorded in the history books, when the higher-ups of Snow Empire were considering life and death, Jia Delin only considered success or failure. Dongqing Wudi commanded his army to go north, and his sword pointed straight at Kamas. The situation was so clear. The Black Dragon army unreservedly vented their sharpness and combat power in Snow Country, telling the world their terrifying combat power. There were several legions of Snow Country along the way from the border to Kamas, but no one could guarantee that these legions could stop Dongqing Wudi. Moreover, leaving these legions was equivalent to compromising with Mormon's battle situation. No one could predict the consequences, and no one could bear the responsibility. Jia Delin thought that this war was the best time for him to get his hands on enough chips. To put it bluntly, he couldn't afford to lose in the face of variables. Dongqing Wudi was unstoppable. The only thing he could do was to fight for time. If he couldn't beat Dongqing Wudi, he would race against time with him. The strong and iron-blooded order was directly issued to all military bases in Snow Country as soon as the meeting ended. Almost all the fighter jets that could be on standby received specific orders. Snow Country satellites and radars began to monitor all of Eastern Europe. Snow Country, which claimed to have the largest spy network in the world, launched all the spies and agents, and the follow-up means were turned over one by one. Blocking the airspace of Eastern Europe. Blockade the land of Eastern Europe. Immediately, the huge naval fleet of Snow Country began to set out to sea. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State was in Reki City. Since he wanted to compete with Dongqing Wudi for the world, he must ensure that Li Huaqing could not leave Eastern Europe. Only in this way could all this make sense. In the process of conveying all the orders, the president of Snow Country, Jia Delin, had already flown directly to the encampment of the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps by helicopter. When Dongqing Wudi wanted to defeat Kamas, the president of Snow Country, Jia Delin, had already begun to carry out the plan to capture Li Huaqing alive without hesitation. Everything was moving forward. Life and death, victory and defeat, there was no turning back. Jia Delin knew very well what this battle meant. It meant the fate of the Snow Empire, and it also meant his own future. In his heart, this was an equally important matter. Eastern Europe, August 24th afternoon. When Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, went more than 200 miles deep into Snow Country, President Jia Delin of Snow Country left the 7th and 14th Corps of Snow Country to conquer Wulan State. In the second hour, the 70,000-strong army encountered a division of the Arctic Ocean Command that had been scattered. The 70,000-strong army was like a ferocious tiger. In less than an hour, they annihilated the defeated soldiers of the Arctic Ocean Command, and then began to charge at full speed. The chaos had reached its peak. With the actions of Dongqing Wudi and Jia Delin, the entire international situation began to become complicated and tense. Reki City Manlisai Hotel. The banquet, which had an incomparably grand beginning, but an incomparably chaotic process, continued. The resplendent hall was filled with soft music. One by one, the clan leaders, who were still full of ambition yesterday, began to vent their negative emotions in the hall. Irritation, anger, resentment, fear, and even regret appeared on their faces. Everyone had already known the news of last night. After all, the blockade of Wulan State was not thorough enough. When the first clan leader of a wealthy family learned the news of the war in Eastern Europe, the bad news spread to the whole audience like a plague. Everyone was anxiously waiting for the news. However, after Wulan State learned its lesson, the news was blocked very well this time. All the clan leaders of the wealthy families present were almost under house arrest in the banquet hall. As time went by, the clan leaders of the wealthy families, who did not know the scale of the war for the time being, kept speculating about the news. Their moods also became more and more chaotic in the speculation, and then they lost their composure. At lunchtime, the hotel provided exquisite food. Wulan State was famous for its beauties all over the world. The waiters carefully selected by the hotel had the capital to make people's eyes light up. However, no matter for beauties or delicacies, these clan leaders were not in the mood to enjoy them now. After a clan leader of a wealthy family talked to a waiter with a smile, but did not get any useful reply, the clan leader, who was almost completely crushed by the inner pressure overnight, completely turned hostile. He slapped the waiter's delicate and white face and shouted abuse. The situation in the banquet hall suddenly became chaotic. As soon as the chaos appeared, it became calm. A large number of soldiers of Wulan State with live ammunition poured into the hall. The soldier at the front pulled the trigger against the ceiling. As soon as the gunshot sounded, the whole hall suddenly became quiet. The neat soldiers separated the crowd and moved forward. Finally, they guarded around the high platform in the center of the banquet. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who was tightly protected, walked up to the high platform and looked down. His eyes were dignified and solemn. He knocked on the microphone. "Everyone," his voice echoed in the conference room. "I'm here to announce bad news. About 3 hours ago, the war in most areas of Eastern Europe was over." In the extremely silent atmosphere, only Li Huaqing's voice sounded. "Snow Country and their allies have won." Some people looked embarrassed, some were pale, some had dim eyes, and some looked panicked. They were the clan leaders of wealthy families all over Eastern Europe. Now the war in most areas of Eastern Europe had ended, and Snow Country had won. What about their families and foundations? The worst news is that we've got the exact information. This night, it's not just you who were attacked. Some wealthy families who didn't come to Reki City were also targeted by the coalition forces of Snow Country, such as this one. He raised his hand, and a photo that everyone was familiar with appeared on the screen of the banquet hall. "Patriarch Clive," Li Huaqing said in a deep voice, "his family is stronger than many of the families here, and it has never had any political inclination in the past. Zhongzhou State has no contact with the Clive family, but when the war broke out, the soldiers of Snow Country broke into the Clive family. 4 hours ago, Patriarch Clive surrendered and signed a series of property transfer agreements. 3.5 hours ago, Patriarch Clive was shot in his family headquarters. According to the current news, his beautiful wife and daughter have disappeared." A cold and stiff atmosphere suddenly broke out in the silence. F***CK. Damn it. These bastards. In the hustle and bustle, everyone had a feeling of sympathy. It was not difficult to imagine Clive's mood when he signed the family property transfer agreement. And it was not difficult to imagine the humiliation he would suffer after his wife and daughter were missing. Li Huaqing's voice was still calm. "There are many such examples. I have no other meaning in saying this. I just want to tell you that there were many reasons for the situation to develop to this point. But the war last night had little to do with your choice to stand by Zhongzhou State. Snow Country launched the war because they wanted to establish a new order, that's all. I have issued an order through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Zhongzhou State and given a warning to Snow Country. So everyone, you should feel lucky because you are now friends, partners, and even your own people of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State has the obligation to protect you. Snow Country and their allies want your industries." With the warning from Zhongzhou State first, before you fall into their hands, your families may be under house arrest or locked up, but at least they won't die mysteriously, and they won't suffer humiliation that they shouldn't have. All the patriarchs of the wealthy families in the banquet hall were silent. Everyone was looking at Li Huaqing with complicated eyes, but the atmosphere in the banquet hall was much better than before. At least the strength of Zhongzhou State was something that all the wealthy families could rest assured about. Li Huaqing casually waved his hand and said, "Everyone, the war is not over yet. I, the standing minister of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Marshal Dongqing Wudi, has now led tens of thousands of elites of the Black Dragon Army to penetrate hundreds of miles into the territory of Snow Country. It is estimated that Marshal Dongqing will reach Kamas in 24 hours. And the latest news is that Jia Delin is desperate. At present, he is personally leading 2 legions to Reki City. Snow Country is racing against time with Marshal Dongqing. You should all know what this means." Jia Delin wants to capture not only me but also the delegation I brought with me, because those hundreds of people are also important figures in Zhongzhou state. Similarly, he also wants to capture you alive. What I said is the truth, and I want to emphasize that from now on, I will not leave this hall. The war is going on. Everyone, Zhongzhou state is taking the same risks as you. And the outcome of the war depends on the speed of Marshal Dongqing and Jia Delin, on the decisive battle in Mormons, and also on you. At this time, if you have any means that you haven't used, there is no need to hide them now. In a few hours, a dozen hours, I hope to still be here to celebrate our victory with you. At that time, the cake in front of us will be the whole of Eastern Europe. Heaven and hell had always been separated by only a thin line. This banquet had now become a complete gamble. The loser would lose all their possessions and their families. The winner would get endless benefits from all of Eastern Europe. Li Huaqing walked down the platform and said, "If anyone wants to quit or seek refuge in Snow Country at this time, you can leave. In the name of Zhongzhou State, I will not stop you." His figure walked to the lounge at the back of the banquet hall. The patriarchs of the wealthy families in the hall did not move. In the subtle silence, someone finally began to take out their mobile phones. The mobile phone signal had been restored. One call after another was made to all corners of Eastern Europe. The hidden means of the wealthy families began to ferment gradually. Behind the banquet hall was a row of corridors. There were boxes on both sides, which were lounges. It was also a place to talk about some major projects in cooperation. The soldiers escorting Li Huaqing stopped in front of the corridor. Li Huaqing walked to his lounge alone. His expression was still calm, but his eyes were full of solemnity. By now, the chaos in Eastern Europe was no longer a conflict in the Dark World, but a large-scale war involving the whole of Eastern Europe. Zhongzhou State had been completely involved. The winner would live, the loser would die, and the way to retreat had completely disappeared. At this time, he suddenly missed the Snowdance Corps, which had been frozen on the parade square by Wang Tianzong's sword. If the Snowdance Corps of more than 10,000 people could move freely at this time, the entire Reki city would have at least 100,000 more troops. What was there to fear about the two legions of Snow Country? Passing the corner, a clear and melodious laughter rang out. It was the laughter of a young girl, delicate, mellow and carefree. Along with the girl's laughter, the middle-aged man bragged triumphantly, "Daughter, you don't know that I was standing at the gate of the group at that time." Merson and the leaders of several other consortia bent over and walked down the steps. They even wanted to shake hands with me. "Ha ha ha ha, it's a joke." Agreed? How could I agree? I wouldn't agree. The old guy Merson almost knelt down to me. Later, in less than 3 months, I directly bought nearly 70% of the 4 consortia's industries, and then sold them and made a lot of money. Li Huaqing was in a daze. He knew what the other party was talking about. However, at this time and in this kind of atmosphere, it was really inconceivable to hear such a conversation. How heartless must one be to brag here when war and artillery could come at any time? He passed the corner and turned his head to take a look. In his sight, Han Donglu, the boss of Zhongzhou State's Flourishing Age Fund, was standing in the corridor with his daughter, Han Xinyan, talking smugly about his past when he was young. Li Huaqing shook his head subconsciously. He knew what Han Donglu had just said. It was many years ago when the Flourishing Age Fund had just risen. At that time, Li Huaqing was still working in Liaodong. The so-called Merson was a financial tycoon in Eastern Europe many years ago, and also the most important stepping stone in the rise of the Flourishing Age Fund. The financial war between the newly rising Flourishing Age Fund and Merson's Angel Fund could be said to be really thrilling. Although there was no fighting, every detail was full of unconstrained intelligence. After the end of the war, the Flourishing Age Fund expanded into a real behemoth almost overnight. Today, that war was still regarded as an unsurpassable legend by the industry. He did have the capital to brag about this matter, not to mention that he was bragging to his own woman. It didn't matter if it was exaggerated. But the point was, didn't Boss Han feel that the occasion was wrong? Han Xinyan saw Li Huaqing's figure and pointed her white and tender finger at her father. Han Donglu leisurely turned around with a glass of red wine in his hand and happened to see Li Huaqing shaking his head. He was slightly stunned, coughed dryly, and smiled awkwardly. Mr. President, I'm sorry. Don't mention it. What Boss Han just said is true. The battle between the Flourishing Age Fund and the Angel Fund has been used as a teaching material by all the major funds. If you want to talk about flattery, they are more exaggerated than you. Li Huaqing joked. Han Donglu laughed and was high-spirited. When his wealth reached such a level, he could really be regarded as rich as a country. In front of anyone, he could freely withdraw and release his wealth. Those people outside should have started to move, right? These wealthy families have been developing in Eastern Europe for many years. Now, although they have suffered setbacks on the surface, who knows how many secret means they have? They are the real local tyrants. The current war is just an opportunity for them to use all their secret means. If they hide it this time, the next time they take it out, it is estimated that they will deal with Zhongzhou state. Han Donglu shook his head, looked at Li Huaqing and gave him a thumbs up. Good move, President. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and shook his head with a smile. I'm just telling the truth. There must be hidden dangers if these people are locked up here. In that case, it's better to tell them the truth and let them play by themselves. Maybe it will work. Anyway, I'm not lying. After removing the communication shield, they know what they should do. He paused, turned to look at Han Donglu, and said thoughtfully, Boss Han, you don't seem to be worried at all. In such a chaotic situation, with Han Donglu's status, he should be the most worried one. In terms of wealth, Han Donglu could be said to have reached the peak. If Snow Country broke through Reki City before Dongqing Wudi, apart from Li Huaqing, Han Donglu could be said to be the most valuable target. If Snow Country could plunder all the wealth of the Flourishing Age Fund, it would be enough to make up for the internal turmoil of Snow Country after the loss of the Violet family. It could even make up for the loss of this war. Maybe it could also increase military expenses for a few years or even longer. Of course, at that time, Han Donglu and even Han Xinyan would also end up horribly. What are you worried about? Han Donglu was a little puzzled. The 2 legions of Snow Country are now on the way to Reki City. Jia Delin is leading them in person. Li Huaqing said calmly. Han Donglu nodded. Oh, 2 legions. His voice was casual and flat. The 2 legions led by Jia Delin were understated in his words, as if Li Huaqing had just said that he had eaten 2 eggs not long ago. They can't come over. What are you worried about? Han Donglu took out a cigarette and handed it to Li Huaqing. He sighed and said, It's a tragedy for Jia Delin. He wants to die, but he doesn't have the chance. Li Huaqing took the cigarette and was a little stunned. Why can't they come over? Because they have too few people. Han Donglu's tone was extremely calm. There are only 2 legions. Does Jia Delin think that he can compete with Marshal Dongqing by leading them in person? He shook his head. Are you kidding me? Han Xinyan took the room card and opened the door of the box. Han Donglu walked in, turned around and said with a smile, President, would you like to come in and have a seat? I have a bottle of good wine here. Li Huaqing was stunned for a moment and looked at Han Donglu. He really couldn't figure out where the other party's inexplicable confidence came from. The 2 legions of Snow Country had nearly 70,000 people. This was not a large number, but it was definitely not a small number. The base of the Arctic Ocean Command, Inam, was scattered at the beginning of the war. The entire Arctic Ocean Command was not prepared at the beginning. In addition, Commander Cheng Huaining had just taken office. In the command of the battle, although his orders were sound, they had changed. Now the entire Arctic Ocean Command was scattered. As for the 4 countries around Wulan State, Oga State and Ross State were in the direction of the March of Snow Country. These 2 countries were small countries. In the past, they advanced and retreated together with Wulan State. Moreover, Ross Oga and Wulan State had been severely ravaged by the Snowdance Corps. The armies of the 3 countries had suffered heavy losses. To put it bluntly, the only obstacle between Jia Delin and Reki City was not the troops along the way. There were almost no troops along the way. The only obstacle between the 2 was actually the distance. And every minute and every second, the distance was shortening. If not, Jia Delin would not be crazy enough to compete with Dongqing Wudi in speed. After all, a madman was not an idiot. Mr. President? Han Donglu stood outside the door and shouted again. Don't you want to come and sit down? No. Li Huaqing came to his senses, suppressed his inner doubts, and smiled. I have something to do. Han Donglu nodded and closed the door. He turned around and found that his daughter was looking at him with great curiosity, and the look in her eyes was extremely strange. Han Donglu touched his face subconsciously. What's wrong? Old Han, are you really not worried? Han Xinyan was silent for a while, and then suddenly asked, The army of Snow Country is coming here. Aren't you also not worried? Han Donglu laughed. He walked to the computer and turned it on. He casually looked at the stock trend chart on the screen, picked up the mouse and operated it in boredom. I'm not worried because of you, okay? Han Xinyan rolled her eyes and poured a cup of tea for Han Donglu. Han Donglu took the tea, took a sip, and shook his head subconsciously. Eastern Europe was different from Zhongzhou State. Because of the environment, tea could almost be regarded as a luxury. Even the so-called special tea provided by the Manlisai Hotel was too far from his taste. Han Xinyan propped her cheeks and looked at her father. Her quiet and beautiful face was filled with confusion. You are my father. You are here and you said that everything will be fine. Of course I won't worry, because you will be there to support me no matter what happens. I thought it was okay, but the president just had a lot on his mind. I could feel that he was also nervous. The patriarchs and big shots outside are all nervous and afraid. I don't look down on them, because I know that they are different from me. If something really happens, no one will support them. On the contrary, they have to support the people standing behind them. Old Han, you are the same, but why are you not worried and nervous? Han Donglu's hand holding the mouse paused, and then he said with a smile, As I said, because they have too few people, don't worry. But we have very few people too. Han Xinyan stared at her father. After a long silence she whispered, Dad, I'm a little scared. Han Donglu narrowed his eyes. An inexplicable emotion flashed through his eyes. In the extremely complicated chart, he reached out his hand and clicked the mouse twice casually. Then he touched his daughter's hair with the other hand. Don't worry, he said softly, it's okay. Han Xinyan ignored him. She stared blankly at the stock that Han Donglu had manipulated and muttered to herself. Old Han, are you really senile? You will lose money if you do this. What do you mean? Han Donglu was stunned. He took a deep look at his daughter and whispered, That's what I mean. He walked to the window with the teacup and opened it. Reki City, which had been disturbed by the wind and rain for several days, finally welcomed the sunshine. It was bright and warm, and the sky was clear. Han Donglu looked at the sky and was silent for a long time. At this time, he was no longer the middle-aged uncle who laughed when bragging to his daughter. His thin figure stood in front of the window, with an incomparably deep power. A melodious chime came from the wall clock in the private room. Han Donglu looked down at his watch and muttered to himself, At this time, it's almost time to enter the market. When he walked into his own lounge, the secretary was answering the phone with a serious look. Li Huaqing sat on the sofa and waved his hand silently, motioning for the secretary to continue. He poured a cup of tea himself, leaned against the sofa and closed his eyes to rest. The secretary quickly hung up. He quickly walked to Li Huaqing's side and whispered, President, it's a call from the Prime Minister. Li Huaqing sat up slightly. What did the Prime Minister say? The Prime Minister hopes that you can leave Reki City. He said that this is the common wish of all comrades. In addition, I also received calls from the old Minister Dongcheng, Minister Qi Beizong, Headmaster Zhuang Huayang, and even some retired old comrades such as Senior Li. At this time, everyone thinks that you should leave Eastern Europe. The secretary's tone was extremely slow. Li Huaqing was silent and did not speak. The secretary looked at his face and said, In addition, Marshal Dongqing has called you 3 times to express the same meaning. Eastern Europe has currently blocked the airspace and sea area. But if you want to leave temporarily, the Arctic Ocean Command has a secret base in Eastern Europe. The military will arrange for you to leave temporarily. Li Huaqing glanced at him. With a smile in his eyes he asked, What do you think? The secretary hesitated for a moment. Just as he was about to speak, the phone suddenly rang again. He took out his mobile phone and looked at it, hesitating a little. It's Marshal Dongcheng. Oh, Li Huaqing said, waved his hand and said, don't answer it first. Cut the video. The secretary nodded, hung up the phone, and went to operate the screen. A few minutes later, Dongcheng Wudi's figure appeared on the screen in front of Li Huaqing. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, who almost overturned the entire southern part of Snow Country, was covered in blood. His face had been washed. After wiping it with a towel, he became clean again and even looked a little younger. But his eyes were full of solemnity. President, I suggest you leave Reki City immediately. Without any courtesy, after saluting, he went straight to the point and said, the secret base of the Arctic Ocean Command is about 400 miles away from Reki City. I will arrange reliable people. You can't go. Li Huaqing directly interrupted Dongcheng Wudi's words. Dongcheng Wudi froze for a moment, and then fell silent. After a long time he whispered, a gentleman doesn't stand on a dangerous wall. I'm not a gentleman. Li Huaqing said with a smile, I'm the president of Zhongzhou State. No matter where I am, I represent Zhongzhou State. I'm invincible. In such a situation, what's the point of me leaving? Comrades will understand. Dongcheng Wudi's voice was low. They will understand, but no one will really understand. Li Huaqing whispered. It may not be difficult to retreat, but if I leave, it will represent the compromise of Zhongzhou State. Not to mention whether the morale of the army will be affected. Even Wulon State will be in chaos in an instant. I can leave, but how can the people I brought leave? If these people fall into the hands of Snow Country, it will also be a disaster for Zhongzhou State. In fact, for Zhongzhou State, what's so important about me? The most important thing is the president. If I really die here, the Snow Empire will soon have a new president. Perhaps there will be chaos for a period of time, but as long as you defeat the Snow Empire, the chaos within the country will not cause too much waves. He looked at Dongcheng Wudi and smiled. Remember why I told you I was so satisfied with Tianlan? It's still the same now. He has always been the most satisfactory candidate for the state-protecting war god. Gu Xingyan will compromise and make concessions, but he is not strong enough. The Wang family of Beihai is tough enough, but in Wang Tianzong's heart, the Wang family of Beihai is more important than Zhongzhou State. Tianlan is different. He will never choose, and he has no choice. So no matter what is ahead, he will rush forward. In fact, most of the time, everyone's situation is the same. Tianlan carries the Li family on his back and will not retreat. Behind you are tens of thousands of troops, and behind me is the whole Zhongzhou State. Standing at such a height, we can't compromise, and we can't afford to compromise. I will stand here. Li Huaqing was silent for a while and said firmly, no matter what the outcome is, I must stand here, even if I die. Both at home and abroad, my successors will know that the president of Zhongzhou State is not a position that can be retreated or compromised. Dongcheng Wudi did not speak for a long time. Li Huaqing suddenly laughed. In those days, the Li family's young and young highnesses swept across Eastern Europe and created the momentum of Eastern Europe. Now you and your precious son-in-law are also sweeping across Eastern Europe and creating momentum. It's so similar. In a few years, this may be another legend. Momentum. It's easy to get it, but it's even easier to lose it. But it's not easy for Zhongzhou State to have the current situation. If I retreat, Zhongzhou State's momentum in Eastern Europe will be gone, so needless to say. He looked at the screen and said word by word, I won't retreat. Dongcheng Wudi was completely silent. When Jia Delin was thinking about victory or defeat, in the face of such a situation, the president of Zhongzhou State was thinking about life and death. He would not die. Even if Snow Country really attacked Reki City, Jia Delin did not dare to kill Li Huaqing. But at this moment, the president of Zhongzhou State said word by word that he would die. What this meant was self-evident. Dongcheng Wudi did not say much in the end. He silently hung up the phone. The screen went black. Li Huaqing leaned on the sofa, closed his eyes, and hummed softly. In the temporarily modified carriage, looking at the darkened screen and Dongcheng Wudi, all the high-level members of the Black Dragon army did not speak. The army was rushing forward madly, like a torrent, Like a huge wave, a raging tide drowning everything. Dongqing Wudi's voice slowly sounded after a long silence. Did you hear that? No one spoke, but every high-level member of the Black Dragon Army straightened up. The president won't retreat. Dongqing Wudi slowly said, "What should we do?" All the high-level members took a step forward at the same time. Dongqing Wudi was expressionless. His face was tense, and every pore was full of killing intent and violence. Charge! The next second, in the mighty Black Dragon Army, everyone heard the almost crazy roar from the commander. Full speed ahead. Black Dragon Army charge! The mighty military truck ran fast on the road. Jia Delin sat in the spacious carriage, watching the army's marching route and the battle reports from all over, his face extremely cold. The spacious truck had now become the hub of the whole snow country. Countless pieces of important news were gathering in this place. Important news. And all of them were bad news. 5 hours ago, the Fifth Fleet of Snow Country was completely annihilated. 2 hours ago, the Black Dragon Army of Zhongzhou State broke through the city of Seine. An hour ago, Mormons. The 13th Corps was completely annihilated. Half an hour ago, Li Tianlan's motorcade officially entered the Mormons area. At the same time, the Purgatory God of Heaven capital personally took action. The sword light was magnificent and illuminated the whole city. The elites of the Polar Ground Alliance suffered heavy losses. Countless pieces of bad news came one after another. And the only good news was from Jia Delin. The 7th Corps and the 14th Corps of Snow Country were extremely fast. In the full-speed charge, the army had run over Im and rushed into Ross State. Although the few remaining troops of Ross State resisted desperately, they were completely dispersed in a short time. Jia Delin did not even arrange for people to chase after the defeated soldiers. He and his army all focused their eyes in the direction of Reki City. Move forward, keep moving forward. The screen in the carriage was slightly separated. The video of Dongqing Wudi marching into Kamas appeared at the same time as Jia Delin marching into Reki City. Everyone who saw these two routes heaved a sigh of relief. The Arctic Ocean Command was broken up and temporarily unable to support. The military forces of Ross State and Oga State were extremely weak. At this moment, when Dongqing Wudi was less than 400 miles away from Kamas, Jia Delin's army was less than 200 kilometers away from Reki City. In the end, Snow Country won the war for time. Jia Delin's expression was still tense, but the people around him had already smiled. "Mr. President, maybe we can get in touch with Reki City now." A major general staff officer came over, looking a little relaxed. Dongqing Wudi was less than 400 miles away from Kamas. In Kamas City, there were about 8,000 palace warriors and nearly 20,000 capital troops. Dongqing Wudi now had only a little more than 50,000 available elites. It would take time to defeat these two elites. This time was enough for Snow Country to completely crush Reki City. "Contact," Jia Delin murmured. "Yes, it's to practice them and negotiate." The staff officer was full of confidence. Zhongzhou State should have seen the situation clearly. According to our people's report, Li Huaqing has not left Reki City so far. Now Li Huaqing and the lives of countless big shots in Zhongzhou State are in our hands. We can kill them all, but I personally suggest that we cooperate with Zhongzhou State. President Jia Delin glanced at the staff officer coldly and did not speak. Now the situation in Mormons is not optimistic. We can pretend to cooperate with Zhongzhou State, transfer Dongqing Wudi's army to Mormons, and let them break the deadlock for us. Then we can secretly mobilize the army and complete the encirclement of Mormons. At that time, we can wipe out the Black Dragon Battalion, and even kill Dongqing Wudi. Jia Delin narrowed his eyes and did not speak. Indeed, they could not solve the problem even if they were faster than Dongqing Wudi. At most, they could relieve the pressure that Dongqing Wudi brought to Snow Country. But even if they caught Li Huaqing, the deadlock in Mormons was still in a stalemate. Even if they forced the Beihai Corps and Li Tianlan's motorcade, the battlefield would still be chaotic. At that time, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Samsara Palace, and Snow Country would fight to the death. In fact, on the battlefield, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Beihai Corps, and the Samsara Palace were also fighting each other. The withdrawal of these two forces would only make the Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital kill fewer targets. But if they cooperated with Zhongzhou state, Jia Delin frowned and felt a little disgusted. He instinctively disliked the word cooperation. The staff officer immediately understood. He smiled and said, "Cooperation may not be accurate. After all, the president of Zhongzhou state is in our hands. To be exact, we should coerce Zhongzhou state to cooperate with our actions." Jia Delin's brows loosened slightly. He thought for a moment and ordered, "Contact Dongqing Wudi." At this distance, everyone could be completely sure that Dongqing Wudi could no longer catch up with Jia Delin's speed. Even if he defeated Kamas, Li Huaqing and countless important figures of Zhongzhou state would also fall into Jia Delin's hands. At this time, Jia Delin really wanted to see Dongqing Wudi's expression. The god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, strong and iron-blooded, had been strong for most of his life. Therefore, in the current situation, Jia Delin very much hoped to see Dongqing Wudi bow his head and admit defeat. The staff officer personally arranged the call. The call rang and was immediately hung up. The staff officer was stunned and tried again. The call was ringing. Then he hung up. It was self-evident what it meant. The staff officer looked a little embarrassed and said hesitantly, The other party refused to talk to us." Jia Delin snorted heavily. He thought for a moment and said, "Stop the car and let the soldiers rest in place for half an hour. Contact Wulan State. I want to talk to Li Huaqing." After all, Li Huaqing was not Dongqing Wudi. Therefore, the call was extremely smooth. In less than 5 minutes, the two presidents of the superpowers, who were less than 200 miles apart, had already seen each other through a screen. "Hello, President Li Huaqing." Jia Delin's expression was calm and indifferent. It was a completely confident posture. Li Huaqing smiled. "I'm curious." His voice was low. "At this time, our two countries are at war. I don't think it's necessary for us to talk." "I think it's enough," Jia Delin said calmly. "Your Excellency, I'm less than 200 miles away from Reki City now. Do you know what this means?" "I don't think you can come over." Li Huaqing thought for a moment and said calmly. Jia Delin sneered. "I can bet with you that within 3 hours, my army and I will enter Reki City. Your god of massacre said that he wanted to have tea with me in the palace of Snow Country. Maybe he can't realize his dream, but 3 hours later, I can have tea with you. Your Excellency, how do you feel?" Li Huaqing shrugged and did not speak. "You still have a choice now," Jia Delin said calmly. "Before I get to Reki City, you still have a lot of time to consider the cooperation between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country. As long as the Arctic Ocean Command withdraws from Eastern Europe, Zhongzhou State helps Snow Country win Mormons and returns the land that once belonged to Snow Country, including the Wang family of Beihai. My army can stop attacking when it arrives in Reki City." Li Huaqing said with some confusion. "The Arctic Ocean Command withdraws from Eastern Europe, helps you win all the interests in Eastern Europe, and returns the land, including the Wang family of Beihai." "Returns?" He laughed. "President Jia Delin, are you kidding?" Jia Delin laughed in a low voice. "Those who know me well know that I never joke. I don't mean that." Li Huaqing shook his head. "I mean, why do you dare to make such a condition? Since when does Snow Country deserve to make conditions with Zhongzhou State? With just your 2 legions? What a joke. With my 2 legions." Jia Delin grinned grimly. "My 2 legions are enough to crush the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou State today." He glanced at the screen and said coldly, "Li Huaqing, there are still 60 kilometers left. Wait for me. Soon we will meet." Li Huaqing laughed, stood up, and said, "Bring it on." Before Jia Delin could speak, a sudden chaos suddenly came over. A large number of legions began to be in turmoil, and there was an uproar. Amidst the buzzing sound, everyone seemed to be shouting something in disbelief. Because everyone was talking, no one could hear the specific content. Jia Delin's face changed. He turned off the video and walked out of the carriage. The outside world was already in chaos. The soldiers who were temporarily reorganizing here were running chaotically in every corner, and everyone was passing on a message. Vaguely, the bad news finally reached Jia Delin's ears. Jia Delin's brain buzzed and became blank in an instant. In the afternoon of August 24th in Eastern Europe, on the battlefield of Mormons, the Arctic Army and the Bear Army, which had always been known as the pride of Snow Country, they were all wiped out. Chapter 596. At that moment, it was like entering the cold winter from the sunny early spring. The coldness of the whole world rushed over with ferocious malice. Chaos began to spread without warning. A lot of news, countless analyses, and sophisticated plans were completely disrupted at the same time. Jia Delin's brain was buzzing, and the spreading chill attacked his body. His body swayed, and he struggled to hold on to the carriage. More and more figures kept running in front of him. They shouted and screamed with panic on their faces. This was also Jia Delin's mood at the moment. Only the soldiers of Snow Country knew what polar bear meant to Snow Country. Arctic. Polar bear. These were the two armies that had always been at the top since the founding of Snow Country. It could also be said that Snow Country had built these two armies at all costs for many years. Joining these two armies could be said to be the highest honor for all the soldiers of Snow Country. Countless military expenses, the top high-tech equipment, the treatment of ordinary soldiers comparable to that of middle-level officers, and even some special privileges, each of which showed the special nature of these two armies. Almost sparing no effort in training also meant that every soldier of Polar Bear could be said to be a walking arsenal. They were armed to the teeth with real guns and cutting-edge high-tech equipment all over their bodies. Under normal circumstances, even if a team of 5 polar bears were not familiar with each other, they could kill an ordinary reinforced company in just a few minutes with simple cooperation. This was Polar Bear, the strongest elite of Snow Country. To some extent, Snow Country's unstinting propaganda and support for Polar Bear had made all the soldiers of Snow Country believe in their invincible terror and strength. Polar Bear was invincible in the world. This was the belief that the military of Snow Country had always believed in. Many years ago, when Dongcheng Wudi first marched into Snow Country, although the Black Dragon Army also defeated the joint forces of the Arctic Army and the Bear Army, and even made them lose their flag in the process of escape, the Black Dragon Army itself also suffered heavy losses. In addition, Snow Country deliberately led all the soldiers to think that it was a strategic retreat and transfer of the military of Snow Country. So the belief of the military of Snow Country was not shaken. After that, it was the top officials of Snow Country who were nervous for a period of time. They tried their best to publicize the strength and sharpness of Polar Bear, so that the army of Snow Country was more convinced. Once the belief was accumulated to a certain extent, it would become a belief. It was different from Zhongzhou State. Everyone in Zhongzhou State also knew that the Border Control Corps was the most powerful army in Zhongzhou State, but it was too large. The major groups in Zhongzhou State also had doubts about Dongcheng Wudi. In the past many years, although the Border Control Corps had a high reputation, it had not reached the level of Polar Bear. Moreover, everyone knew that no matter how powerful the Border Control Corps was, there was still the Beihai Corps in Zhongzhou State that was not inferior to the Border Control Corps. In addition, Gu Xingyun had replaced the Li family over the years, and Kunlun City was constantly developing. Therefore, although there were constant internal struggles in Zhongzhou State, it had always maintained vitality. In Snow Country, all the troops only had polar bears in their eyes. Many people didn't even know that the Polar Bear Army was actually divided into two armies. The polar bear became the religion of the army of Snow Country. It seemed that no one had ever thought that there would be a day when their belief collapsed, and to what extent the morale of the entire Snow Empire would collapse. Jia Delin held on tightly to the handle of the carriage. The chaotic shouts from the outside world kept coming in, and the first thing that came to his mind was how the Polar Bear Army had been completely annihilated. What was Tyrant doing? What was the Polar Ground Alliance doing? Jia Delin's heart was suddenly filled with anger. A lot of gunfire suddenly came from the temporarily reorganized army in front of him. Countless artillery fire rang out around Jia Delin. The earth was shaking, and screams and roars of disbelief rang out at the same time. Jia Delin stared blankly at this scene. His brain couldn't react at all, and he looked a little confused for a moment. The sudden outbreak of fighting spread to the entire army in an instant. The march of Snow Country was extremely powerful and rude. Wherever the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps passed, there was silence. At this time, the two armies were in the wilderness and had not been attacked at all. Then everything in front of them, internal strife. Jia Delin's eyes suddenly went black, and he roared angrily, "What's going on?" No one answered his question at all. The fighting broke out completely in a short period of chaos. The 7th Corps, the 14th Corps, every division, every regiment, and every company, in the densely packed camp, almost everyone held a gun and fired at the opposite side at the same time. A soldier of Snow Country looked blankly at his companions who were fighting. He was still hesitating, and the bullet next to him had directly penetrated his chest. Sharp pain spread through his whole body, and he fell down in a daze. The last scene in front of him was that a companion who he was not familiar with was pointing a gun at him, and his eyes were full of suspicion and suspicion. This is what's going on. The sound of gunfire rang out continuously. Indistinctly, chaotic roars sounded from everywhere, and instantly turned into a wave. Hugh has betrayed the country. Traitor, he leaked the information about the polar bear. Kill Jia Delin. Kill Hamilton. The chaotic roars impacted Jia Delin's will. Jia Delin's face was pale. Hugh Albert Milos. This name was not one of the 8 great marshals of the Snow Empire, but he was once the chief marshal of the Snow Empire, and now the chief of the Snow Empire. In terms of power and influence, he could definitely be counted as one of the top 5 figures of the Snow Empire. In the decisive battle in Mormons, Snow Country was led by the new Chief Marshal Tyrant, and the mastermind behind the scenes was Chief Hugh. He was a veteran of Snow Country's army, and his students were all over the world. General Delin, the second commander of the 7th Corps, and General Hamilton, the commander of the 14th Corps, were both students of Chief Hugh, especially the latter, who was the son-in-law of Chief Hugh. Jia Delin shook his head violently. The situation was too sudden, and it was completely overturned in an instant. Before he had time to figure out what was going on, the fighting was already out of control. Until now, he did not even know whether Chief Hugh had committed treason. No, he did not even know how the news of Chief Hugh's treason spread. What kind of battle report would directly reach the ears of ordinary soldiers in the Corps without going through him? Jia Delin was suddenly shocked, and turned to pick up his phone and began to dial. But as soon as he opened the screen, his fingers became stiff. Unbeknownst to him, there was already no signal on the lit-up screen. The fighting continued, and no one could tell what was going on. As soon as the news of the annihilation of the Polar Bear Army spread, the morale of the two corps had completely collapsed. No one knew who was the first to shout out the news of Hugh's treason. Because of the collapse of faith, the soldiers who were eager to find support for themselves naturally began to speculate countless facts that matched their imagination. The speculations of dozens of people began to spread, and in the blink of an eye, a large number of soldiers had already believed that the destruction of the Polar Bear Army was due to Chief Hugh's treason. The commander of the 14th Corps, Hamilton, pulled out his gun in anger and killed a soldier who had provoked the morale of the army. This shot was like a fuse, and all the uneasiness, fear, doubt, and distrust completely exploded. Before Hamilton could put down his gun, countless bullets had already drowned him. Hamilton's personal guards began to fight back, and the fighting was a mess. The nearby panicked soldiers of Snow Country subconsciously joined in. Instinctively, they did not even know who they had hit, but in the eyes of those who were observant, countless people could distinguish between friend and foe. Thus, the chaotic fighting finally had some order. The rumor spread like a plague. The higher-ups of the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps had followed Chief Hugh to commit treason. The personal guards and confidants of the higher-ups clashed with a large number of soldiers. In the end, the two corps could no longer believe whether their comrades around them were on their side or traitors. So the fighting became completely chaotic. The two corps, which had been about to march into Reki City, saw blood, and a large number of people fell. People were making noise everywhere on the battlefield, as if they were shouting at the top of their lungs. At this moment, Hamilton was already dead. As Hugh's student, Doring had already subconsciously believed that his teacher had committed treason. He mobilized all of his trusted subordinates and treated the scene before him as a real war. Amidst the roar of cannon fire, The situation escalated in an instant, and the clamor and shouts from every corner of the battlefield finally became clearer. Countless voices converged into one content: protect the president. In an instant, the two sides of the fighting rushed in Jia Delin's direction at the same time. Gunshots and gunfire, screams and wails. Corpses full of blood and minced flesh fell to the ground, bringing with them endless chaos and cruelty. The war spread directly to Jia Delin. Jia Delin, who was gathering technicians to decode the signal shielding, began to move under the protection of several palace warriors. Soldiers rushed over from all directions, shouting to protect the president. But in such a situation, the elite palace warriors were no longer willing to trust anyone. So in the face of their own country's army, they did not hesitate to start attacking. Lightning and raging fire began to light up. The scene became more and more chaotic. In the despair and anxiety of the end of the world, the technicians finally recovered the new number of the mobile phone. Jia Delin, who was disheartened, immediately dialed Hugh's number. The phone rang once and was quickly connected. Chief Hugh's tone was as usual. "Mr. President, has Reki City been breached?" Jia Delin froze for a moment, and his heart instantly sank to the bottom. With just one sentence, he had already confirmed a fact. Hugh did not commit treason. When the news that the Polar Bear Army had been wiped out affected the morale of the army, everything that happened next was a plot that had been secretly planned for a long time. Jia Delin held the phone. At that moment, it was extremely difficult for him to breathe. He planned to use 2 legions to crush the defense of Wulan State. 2 legions, nearly 70,000 people, which was more than enough. But the other side had reached into the military of Snow Country. In the chaos, the morale of the army collapsed, and the camp was in turmoil. After this battle, how many people were left of the 70,000? Even if there were a lot left, how many were willing to obey his orders? 1,000? Or 10,000? In the hail of bullets. Jia Delin suddenly raised his mobile phone and roared, "Listen to me, I'm Boss Jia Delin." Countless bullets and gunfire flew directly over, drowning out his voice. Beside him, several experts of the thunder-shocking realm rushed over to block the bullets. Several other palace warriors pulled Jia Delin and continued to move. In the panic, it seemed that countless people were touching his body, almost lifting him up. Jia Delin was burning with anxiety. Countless sweat poured out of his body, and he shouted at the top of his voice. The sun fell and shone on the countless blood and bones in the wilderness. The unprecedented high temperature made Jia Delin's lips dry and cracked. He felt that his body was getting hotter and hotter, as if it was burning every nerve in his body. Finally, his body staggered and fell directly to the ground. "Wait," he said with difficulty, and his breathing seemed to be on fire. "Wait a minute, He had not finished speaking. "President! Mr. President! My God, why?" In countless exclamations of extreme horror, Jia Delin lowered his head in astonishment. At some point, his body really began to catch fire. Thin flames seeped out from every pore of his body, lightly lingering around the surface of his body. An unimaginable heat engulfed his entire body, bringing with it incomparable pain. Jia Delin opened his eyes and opened his mouth. The next second, countless flames came out of his eyes, mouth, ears, and all over his body. He seemed to struggle to get up. In just a moment, the fire rose, and President Jia Delin's body, which was about to get up, suddenly turned into ashes. The ashes were flying in the wind. Jia Delin had disappeared. The president of Snow Country, who had personally led the expedition, could no longer reach Reki City, and with the direction of the wind, the ashes of his body seemed to float there. The saint warrior looked in the direction where Jia Delin had disappeared with a dull face. After a long time, a voice with a sobbing tone suddenly sounded. The president was killed. The whole battlefield was silent for a moment. On the low mountain thousands of meters away, in the world of the telescope, the whole battlefield began to distort little by little after the extreme silence. A clamor of voices rose from afar, and an even more tragic battle broke out. The telescope kept hesitating. Countless soldiers were completely swept away in confusion and anger. In their sight, on the large battlefield, the number of people was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye almost every moment. The flowing blood was like a river, dyeing the whole wilderness red. The man in the military uniform of Snow Country put down the telescope, shrugged, and said, "Jia Delin is dead." His tone was nonchalant. However, this news was enough to shock the whole world. August 24th. The president of Snow Country was assassinated in the process of personally leading the expedition to Reki City. From this moment on, the giant hand, which had been hidden behind the scenes, finally moved slowly. There was a man sitting next to the man. He quickly sent the news of Jia Delin's death and said without raising his head, "Do you want to put Rex into the observation area?" There was a notebook in front of him. Countless windows were flashing on the notebook, and one of the windows was already filled with densely packed names. Those were the spies that had been used before, or had already been sacrificed. After this battle, even more people would enter the observation area. He clicked on another window. There were very few names in the window, which meant that there were fewer and fewer pawns that they could use. No. The man in the military uniform laughed. "From now on, Rex will enter the implementation area. I think he will not be observed for a long time." He took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. The moment the phone was connected, he bent down slightly and said respectfully, "Fortunately, I didn't fail you. The mission has been successfully completed." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, and then a calm male voice sounded. "You've worked hard. Get ready to retreat." "Rex." The man in the military uniform held the binoculars and hesitated slightly. "That's not what we should care about. Jia Delin is dead. From today on, we just need to see how he performs in Snow Country." The man in the military uniform was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "Got it." He put down the phone, tidied up his military uniform, and said to his companions, "Retreat." The army passed through. The sun had set in the broken city. The dim light shone on the temporary base of the Black Dragon Army. In the atmosphere of iron and blood, the garrison was full of fatigue but extremely sharp anger. The governor's mansion had been completely destroyed. Sitting in the completely destroyed ruins, Dongqing Wudi looked down at the city under his feet and remained silent. There was a battle report at his feet. At this time, the news that Jia Delin, the president of Snow Country, was assassinated had spread throughout the Dark World. The battle between the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps had stopped not long ago. The crazy crowd completely lost their minds under the stimulation of Jia Delin's death. The two corps, which had nearly 70,000 people, ended up with less than 20,000 people. The survivors had almost no fighting spirit. However, Ross State and Oga State sent less than 15,000 troops, and it only took them half an hour to disperse the survivors of the two corps. After this battle, it was certain that Snow Country would abolish the establishment of the 7th and the 14th Corps forever. Of course, the premise was that Snow Country could continue to exist. But now it seemed that whether Snow Country could continue to exist depended largely on the will of Dongqing Wudi. Lieutenant General Wang Qianzhong, the commander of the Black Dragon Army, stood beside Dongqing Wudi and reported the battle damage. "That's about it. Now we have nearly 50,000 people who can fight. If the minister agrees, the Black Dragon Army still has 30,000 available troops, which can arrive as soon as possible. In addition, Marshal Jiang has transferred troops from several other corps of the Border Control Corps. In 3 days, more than 100,000 people from the Pegasus Corps and the Wild Sand Corps will enter Snow Country from Liaodong. Within a week, this number can increase to 200,000. In half a month. Forget it." Dongqing Wudi waved his hand. "Send an order for all the follow-up troops of the Pegasus Corps and the Wild Sand Corps to retreat. Qianzhong, you have to work hard to count the wounded and victims of the Black Dragon Army. The compensation must be in place as soon as possible. You have to keep an eye on this matter personally. No accidents are allowed." Wang Qianzhong hesitated and said subconsciously, "But Marshal Jiang has." "What?" Dongqing Wudi raised his eyebrows. With a faint smile he said, "Marshal Jiang is far away in the south. Do you still want to order me? I'm still here. Do you think my judgment of the situation is not as good as that little guy's?" Wang Qianzhong's face changed, and he shook his head with a bitter smile. "Minister, you know that's not what I mean." He had always called Dongqing Wudi minister, and the boundary was extremely clear. And the Marshal Jiang he called was naturally Jiang Hongwei, the new commander of the Border Control Corps codenamed Dijiang. Wang Qianzhong was the former commander of the Arctic Ocean Command, and one of the core generals of the Wang family of Beihai. After he exchanged posts with Cheng Huaining, the former commander of the Black Dragon Army, his experience in the Black Dragon Army was even more embarrassing than Cheng Huaining's. This embarrassment was vividly reflected in Dongqing Wudi's personal expedition to Snow Country. The moment Dongqing Wudi appeared in the Black Dragon Army, the whole Black Dragon Army seemed to have a soul. It was an unparalleled fanaticism. They broke through the Divine Shield Corps and charged all the way. In countless battles, Wang Qianzhong didn't even give any decent orders. He stood beside Dongqing Wudi and was completely a messenger. And it was foreseeable that as long as the battle continued, he would continue like this. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him, waved his hand and said, "You still don't understand. Jia Delin was assassinated. No matter what happens to Snow Country in the future, at least in the chaos, Snow Country is destined to exit miserably. This also means that the war has come to an end. What do we want to do by mobilizing the army at this time? To completely conquer Snow Country? If that's the case, other countries won't agree." He looked into the distance at Kamas, which was 200 miles away. Vaguely, he could almost feel the panic in that city. If we want to deter Snow Country, these people are enough. At least for now, we don't need to do meaningless things. Wang Qianzhong was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "I see. Go and inform the logistics department to make some delicious food, but don't relax. Alcohol is forbidden. You can choose whatever ingredients you want. If you don't have enough, where can you find them in such a big city? Just go and get them. Also, the compensation I mentioned just now must be treated as a top priority. Come over later and visit the injured with me." Dongqing Wudi looked at the sky. The setting sun was like blood. He shook his head and said, "Take a rest tonight. There's no need to worry about defeating Kamas." Wang Qianzhong gritted his teeth, nodded, and turned to leave. Not long after he left, Tang Guozheng, the vice commander of the Black Dragon Army, came over and called him marshal with a smile. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and didn't bother to pay attention to him. He didn't care about being rude to his own people. Tang Guozheng was burly and rough in managing the army, but he had always been disciplined. Among the generals and even the colonels of the Border Control Corps, his education was not high, but he fought bravely and paid great attention to military law. His strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was enough to convince the masses. Therefore, his army had always been the one that violated the least rules in the whole Zhongzhou state. He was Dongqing Wudi's confidant when he first entered the Border Control Corps. Although he was no longer young and was close to 40 years old, in Dongqing Wudi's eyes he was always a child. Tang Guozheng didn't mind Dongqing Wudi's attitude at all. He smiled and approached Dongqing Wudi. He took out a crumpled cigarette and handed it to Dongqing Wudi. He took out a lighter and smiled politely. "Marshal, would you like a cigarette?" Dongqing Wudi took the cigarette and lit it. He took a puff and said, "Let's make it clear first. If you have something to say, just say it. But if you want to bring up the past again, you don't have to say it." Tang Guozheng's face turned red. He looked at Dongqing Wudi with hidden bitterness. "What a jerk." Dongqing Wudi laughed and scolded. "What? Do you dislike Wang Qianzhong so much? It's the overall will of Zhongzhou state that he comes to the Black Dragon Army. Oh, you want to leave because you can't change it? And you want to be a guard by my side? Damn it, after this fight, you'll have 2 golden stars on your shoulders. When have you ever seen a guard at the level of lieutenant general? In your mind, is being a high-ranking officer in the army not as good as running errands by my side? That's certainly not as good." Tang Guozheng opened his mouth and laughed. His eyes were extremely sincere. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. "Like I said, it's impossible. Even if Zhongzhou state agrees, I won't. Talent is not used like this." In fact, it was very easy to transfer Tang Guozheng away. As long as he communicated with the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai, who was eager to open up the situation in the Border Control Corps, would definitely send Tang Guozheng off with both hands. With him in the Black Dragon army, he, the vice commander, was more majestic than the real commander, Wang Qianzhong. If he could be sent away, as long as the Southeast group was not a fool, how could they refuse? But it was impossible for Dong Qingwudi to give up the border control corps. As long as Tang Guozheng was still in the Black Dragon army, no matter who the commander of the Black Dragon army changed, Dong Qingwudi's right to speak would not be affected in a short time. Tang Guozheng grinned and said, "Marshal, you also think I'm a talent, don't you? I heard that in this chaos, the performance of the Arctic Ocean Command is extremely poor. Boss Cheng just took office not long ago, so it shouldn't affect him much. Wang Qianzhong will probably suffer a lot. To sum up the reason, the Arctic Ocean Command's performance is so poor because there aren't many people around Boss Cheng. Marshal, you know how well I work with Old Cheng. I'm just wondering if I can go to the Arctic Ocean Command and get a position as the Deputy Commander or Chief of Staff. If I can't win, I don't want the merit this time. Just get me somewhere else." Dong Qingwudi looked at him expressionless. Tang Guozheng's smile gradually disappeared, and he settled for the next best thing. He chuckled and said, "If it doesn't work, let me go to Tiannan and stay with His Little Highness. That bastard Li Zonghu is so arrogant around His Little Highness. If I go there, what will happen to him?" Dong Qingwudi narrowed his eyes. "Marshal." Tang Guozheng's expression became serious. "I've thought about it carefully. After this time, you must take advantage of the situation in the military. I wonder if there is a place for me? This is a little big, and I have to consider all aspects. I can't answer you now." Dong Qingwudi had a headache. "Let's wait and see. Even if you want to leave, you have to arrange a successor. There are more than 100,000 good men in the Black Dragon army. If you leave, it will be your responsibility if anything goes wrong in the future. Do you know that?" "Yes." Tang Guozheng laughed and took out a cigarette again. Dong Qingwudi waved his hand. "Get out of here." His cell phone rang. Dong Qingwudi took out his cell phone and glanced at it. His eyes softened slightly. He answered the phone and said, "Hello. Are you busy?" On the phone, Bai Qingqian's voice sounded soft and elegant. "I'm fine." Dong Qingwudi smiled and looked at the setting sun that was no longer dazzling. "I've just taken down Norav City. I can have a good rest tonight. If there are no accidents, the negotiation with Snow Country should arrive tomorrow at the latest." Bai Qingqian hesitated slightly. "Jia Delin's death, is it related to Samsara Palace?" "I don't know." Dong Qingwudi softly interrupted his wife's words. "It's too sensitive to investigate the truth of this kind of thing. Anyway, the facts are right now. As soon as Jia Delin died, Snow Country was destined to exit from the chaos. This time they suffered heavy losses and were in internal chaos. I guess they didn't have the mood to investigate other things." Bai Qingqian agreed. "This is an opportunity. Some time ago, our family was under a lot of pressure. Now with this incident, we can relieve it. The Southeast group is too aggressive. I'll deal with these things. Don't act rashly." Dong Qingwudi's voice was very light, but it was unquestionable. The noble and elegant Madame Dongqing and the border governor's secretary Bai were the same person, but most of the time they were not the same person. Bai Qingqian, who seemed to be gentle and calm, was extremely decisive and fierce in dealing with things. In many cases, she was even vicious to her enemies. Whether in Qinzhou or now in Liaodong. Although Bai Qingqian was a woman, she was an iron-fisted person who was both respected and feared. Some time ago, because of Dong Qingwudi's transfer of troops, the whole giant group was under unprecedented pressure. In a short time, 3 of Dong Qingwudi's old subordinates had been defeated. If this matter was handled well, it would be enough to quell the aftermath of the transfer of troops. Dong Qingwudi was afraid that his wife was not reconciled, and wanted to get something back. Internal strife was different from external warfare. Many things could not be rushed. "I understand." Bai Qingqian smiled. "I'm in Liaodong now. I called you to ask our marshal what support he needs. I promised to make a backup plan." Dong Qingwudi laughed and said seriously, "Thank you, Secretary Bai." The flames of war burned. After the smoke of gunpowder, the husband and wife, who had a frozen relationship, finally gradually got along and became intimate again. Bai Qingqian was silent for a while and said softly, "You still have to pay attention to your side. This time, when you march into snow country, there will be no gossip at home, only praise for your merits. But the international voice is not good. At that time, it is inevitable that some people will say that you are cruel and inhuman. You know, I don't care about that," Dongqing Wudi said lightly. He thought for a moment and continued, "No, I still care. I care about those international comments, but I don't expect them to praise me. I just think they are not cruel enough. I am indeed cruel, but so what? They can say that I am a beast, a butcher, and an executioner. It doesn't matter. The more they say, the happier I am. Because when these comments fall into the ears of the enemy, they can clearly realize what kind of person Dongqing Wudi is. I just chatted with President Huacheng, and he said that we are all people who have no way out. I agree with this. In fact, not only us but anyone who has a concern behind us has no way out. In life, when we carry something, we are destined to move forward. I have you, the Dongqing clan, and hundreds of thousands of troops behind me, so I have no way out. I am the god of massacre. Naturally, I have to kill. I have to kill more people. The worse my international reputation is, the more they will be afraid of me. In this way, the people behind me and my family will be safer." Dongqing Wudi said quietly. His voice was warm, but his eyes were extremely cold. "Qingqian, believe it or not, if I fall in snow country this time, our father and children, you and me, and all the people in the Dongqing clan will die miserably. At that time, none of us will have a good end." He paused and laughed. "So I can't fall and I will never fall. When Tianlan really grows up, I can take over my burden. I will always stand here. As long as I am here, the Dongqing clan and the Bai clan will be there." Bai Qingqian sighed softly, a little absent-minded. Perhaps everyone who reached a high position had this kind of fear deep in their hearts. With fear and concern, they could no longer retreat or compromise. "You have an early rest. I'll hang up first. If there is no accident, I will go back with Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi laughed. Bai Qingqian nodded. Hearing that Dongqing Wudi was as silent as ever, she took the initiative to hang up the phone. The setting sun outside the city finally went down. Night fell. Dongqing Wudi put away his mobile phone and slowly stood up. On the evening of August 24th, the news that President Jia Delin of Snow Country was assassinated spread to all corners of the world in the fastest time, and made the headlines of various countries. Li Huaqing and the patriarchs of the wealthy families in Reki City looked at the news in astonishment. After repeated confirmations, the whole Reki City instantly became a sea of revelry. At the same time, countless countries in the camp of Snow Country began to call back the troops they had sent to Mormons, and at the same time, they sent envoys with enough weight to Reki City to see Li Huaqing. On this night, the Black Dragon Legion of less than 50,000 people stationed in a city 200 miles away from Kamas. On this night, after the chaotic high-level meeting of Snow Country, which had no leader, and facing Dongqing Wudi's increasingly quiet army, everyone finally made the most difficult decision. Snow Country officially gave up Mormons. All the legions that went to Mormons withdrew and reconsolidated their defensive areas. The Foreign Affairs Minister of Snow Country left Kamas in person and paid a visit to Dongqing Wudi. The general trend over Eastern Europe was still roaring. On this night, after Rothschild, the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, the Men in Black, the Jiang family of South America, Knights Templars, the Vatican, Violet, Morton, and other major forces left one after another, Snow Country, one of the world's superpowers, finally admitted defeat and left with a heavy price in the chaos. The end was in sight. The border of Eisen Federation was completely desolate. When the battle in Mormons was at its most stalemate, Eisen Federation almost sent out most of its troops. The Federation, which was empty inside, was crushed by Li Tianlan again. Now the whole country was almost in a state of defenselessness. It was cold and quiet, looking extremely miserable. The fluttering white robe quietly crossed the border of the Eisen Federation and continued moving forward. The red dagger hung on the hem of her white dress, swaying gently as she walked, flashing with red arcs of light. When she was about to enter Snow Country, Li Shi took out a positioning device. On the small screen, A red light spot was flashing gently. Li Shi operated it casually and planned a clear route. Then she moved faster than before. That place was the gathering place of all the forces of Kunlun City in Eastern Europe. In the 20 years since the rise of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City, which had no background, wholeheartedly consolidated its position in Zhongzhou State. In the extremely important Eastern Europe, it did not even leave a base. Among all the major forces, Kunlun City might be the only one that had to rely on positioning devices to gather in the wilderness. The scattered team of only a few hundred people set up a small camp in the wilderness. When Li Shi responded to the reconnaissance signal and came over, an extremely ugly man with a broken arm led everyone to greet her. "Madam, I'm Bloody Hand." The old man with a broken arm bowed slightly and said in a respectful tone. He was an expert at the peak of the thundershocking realm, close to the half-step invincible realm. Before Li Shi officially arrived at the theater of operations, he was the commander-in-chief here. Li Shi glanced at him indifferently, and there was no expression on her delicate and beautiful face. The wind blew over. In the increasingly awkward atmosphere, she suddenly said, "Is everyone here?" Yes. Bloody Hand also seemed a little embarrassed. "Madam, although there are few people here, I can guarantee that they are all elites of Kunlun City. Li Tianlan can lead hundreds of people to defeat the 6 groups of Snow Country, and we also." "You?" Li Shi glanced at him. "Do you think you deserve to compare with Li Tianlan? Not to mention others, can you stop Li Tianlan's sword now?" Bloody Hand's face turned red, but he did not dare to say anything. Li Shi glanced at the crowd in front of her, shook her head and said softly, "It's really shabby." Bloody Hand gave a wry smile, and did not know what to say. After all, Kunlun City's rise was too short, and it did not pay enough attention to the outside of Zhongzhou State. Judging from the performance of the chaos in Eastern Europe, any second-rate force in the dark world that had developed for a long time seemed to be much calmer than Kunlun City. Hundreds of people met in the wilderness. Thinking about it carefully, it could be said as a joke. "Madam, although Kunlun City has no foundation in the outside world now, after this victory," Bloody Hand braced himself to say, and then his words were directly interrupted by Li Shi. "No," Li Shi suddenly said. Bloody Hand looked up in amazement. In his sight, Li Shi's eyes were clear and bright, crystal clear, like the stars in the night sky. Bloody Hand blinked. "What? I mean, Kunlun City will not win in Eastern Europe." He thought of today's intelligence. Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, vomited blood and fainted on the spot when he presided over the internal meeting of Kunlun City. After suppressing the injury for so long, it finally reached the time when it could not be suppressed. Li Shi's eyes were a little dazed, with inexplicable emotions. Bloody Hand suddenly realized that something was wrong, and his body subconsciously took a step back. Li Shi's eyes had completely locked on Bloody Hand. "I still remember you," she said softly. Bloody Hand forced a smile and subconsciously looked at his arm. "Do you still remember me?" Li Shi's voice was very gentle. Bloody Hand's face gradually became pale. "It's been so many years," Li Shi said softly, as if she was lost in memory. "In fact, your lineup could not kill him. Even if summer solstice destroyed the infinite sky, you could not kill him." She was silent for a while. "Bloody Hand, do you remember what you did back then? You kidnapped an old man and used him to coerce a pregnant woman." Li Shi smiled softly. "You poisoned the pregnant woman and wanted to poison the child in her belly." Bloody Hand's eyes were a little desperate. Of course he remembered those things. The pregnant woman at that time was not someone else, but Li Shi in front of him. "You said it was easy to save the lives of the old man and the child. You told the pregnant woman that you only needed one sword. Then that silly woman." Li Shi's tone was absent-minded, and tears flowed down from her eyes. After many years, this seemed to be the first time she shed tears. Her numb heart was shaking and gradually broke through the dusty ice. That silly woman really took out a sword at the most critical time, and aimed it at the man she loved most. Her voice was shaking. But what you don't know is that many years later, when the pregnant woman saw the man she had killed once again, all the feelings she had for him were gone. Not even a little bit. She could only see disgust and hatred in his eyes. She smiled. It was only then that she understood. The reason why he didn't fight back when the sword pierced his heart was not because he loved her. Perhaps he did, but when the sword flashed, all his feelings were gone. The reason why he didn't fight back was to protect the child in the woman's belly. Bloody Hand's body began to tremble. Li Shi cried out. He was also a fool, because neither he nor the pregnant woman at that time thought that after everything was over, the person who kidnapped her father and wanted to poison her child did not keep his promise. The child was born, but he directly fell to death. Bloody Hand suddenly knelt down, and his body trembled. "Madam, this is the order of the governor." I know. Li Shi looked down at him and blinked her eyes. In the tears, the depths of her eyes were full of ice and snow. "But now your governor is seriously injured and unconscious. Who can protect you?" Bloody Hand raised his head in amazement. In his sight, the beautiful face was full of memories. "I don't know what I want to do, but I think since he can't protect you, he can't control me. For so many years, I want to be myself for once." "Madam." Bloody Hand's voice trembled. Li Shi's body gradually rose. The sword light lingered in the field. "My name is Li Shi," he said. A sharp and bright sword light suddenly shone in the vast and empty night. The sword light twisted and split in the air, and countless sword energies surged in an instant. Silently, it tore into countless sword lights and spread to the crowd. Bloody Hand's face was full of horror. He still wanted to say something, but the sword light had already shrouded him. His body was torn into countless pieces by the sword light in an instant. The pain spread. At the moment when his consciousness was about to disappear, he seemed to hear Li Shi's voice. "But what you don't know is that it was not my child who fell to death that year." The eternal darkness swallowed everything. Under the sword, hundreds of elites left by Kunlun City in Eastern Europe turned into minced meat in an instant. Li Shi fell to the ground, and her white clothes fluttered. At this moment, she was herself. Her eyes looked in the direction of Mormons, thinking about everything in the past. The end had begun. Li Shi took a step forward and whispered to herself, "I'm coming." Chapter 597. The flames of war spread from Mormons. Up to now, the area dozens of miles around Mormons had been full of battlefields and the army of snow country. Nearly 400,000 troops rushed to Mormons in an endless stream. The mountains and plains were covered with soldiers preparing for war. In a large-scale war, the extremely cruel fact for any expert had been clearly displayed. So what if he was in the invincible realm? Even if he was at the peak of the invincible realm? Even if he was the chosen one? How many could the sword of the chosen one kill when 400,000 troops came all over the mountains and plains? Li Tianlan didn't remember how many people he had killed. He had even forgotten how long he had been fighting. Entering snow country and approaching Mormons was the beginning of entering hell. The vast army rushed to Mormons. Their lone army was also rushing to Mormons. Hundreds of thousands of troops were scattered in every corner around Mormons. Li Tianlan couldn't hide at all. They first put on the military uniforms of snow country and mixed into the crowd. They were completely exposed when they moved less than 20 miles forward. The battle broke out almost without any hesitation. A large number of troops rushed to Mormons, and the whole legion turned around and charged at Li Tianlan and the others at the same time. It was a confrontation between dozens of people and tens of thousands of people. In the splashing blood, Li Tianlan was at the forefront, trying to penetrate the iron wall of soldiers in front of him. Blood flowed out in the wilderness. As soon as the formation of the first legion became scattered, the second legion had rushed up again. Frenzied, angry, and desperate roars and the sound of gunfire echoed in his ears. In order to save physical strength, Li Tianlan had given up using a sword most of the time. The endless army around him meant an endless supply of weapons and ammunition. The people around him were getting fewer and fewer. The last dozens of people surrounded him and kept rushing forward. Dense soldiers rushed up with red eyes, and Li Tianlan's speed was getting slower and slower. Great fatigue kept eroding his will. The idea that he couldn't get out kept emerging from his heart, but he suppressed it. Li Tianlan didn't feel anything when he set off from Reki City, defeated the 6 legions, ran for thousands of miles, and killed the 6 marshals of Snow Country. The moles of Samsara Palace lurking in the legions of Snow Country always made the most ingenious response at the most appropriate time. At that time, although Li Tianlan felt the pressure, it was far from unbearable. In many cases, with the cooperation of countless moles, he could be considered to be at ease. Only now did he truly feel the effects of war. Not only him, but everyone, including General Yi of the Ninth Heaven of Zhongzhou State, participated in such a large-scale war for the first time. Endless waves of soldiers pounced forward. The sound of gunshots rang out incessantly, and blood splattered everywhere. Layers and layers of corpses piled up on the ground. It was as if there was no end to the number of soldiers that could never be completely killed. They were like an endless wave of frenzied wolves. Being in the midst of them, one would feel an almost suffocating pressure at every moment. The soldiers behind him surrounded him again. There was still no end to the soldiers in front of him. His heart was beating wildly. Li Tianlan, who was gasping for breath, held the machine gun and kept shooting. The muzzle spat out tongues of fire, and the bullets were thrown out like long whips. There was no need to aim. The bullets would hit the target at every moment. Someone fell down and was trampled into meat paste. Behind him, there were still many ferocious and angry faces. They rushed up and fell down. Countless people and countless faces seemed to become exactly the same. Li Tianlan felt dizzy. He couldn't get out. When the thought echoed in his heart again, endless thunder had already burst out around him. The dazzling lightning turned into electric arcs one after another. Yi, whose palms were covered with blood and his fingers were so badly cut that even his bones could be seen, pulled the bowstring. The bowstring was tightening little by little. Blood flowed down from his fingers. Countless flashes of lightning converged on the stormy bowstring, turning into a dark blue arrow. Li Tianlan glanced at him. He shook his head and said, "I can't hold on any longer. Mormon's is 30 miles ahead. At this time, there's no need to save your strength." His body tensed up and he loosened his fingers casually. Whoosh! In the extremely sharp sound, the blue arrow gathered in front of the bow left the bowstring. Bang! A dull explosion sounded almost at the same time. In front of Li Tianlan, a soldier who was about to pounce on him with a grenade was shot to pieces by an arrow. The dazzling arrow kept moving forward with a large area of electric arcs. The arrow flew in a straight line, and the sharp and bright electric arcs continued to spread around. The power of this arrow, which was enough to kill someone at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, or even an ordinary half-step invincible realm, was constantly dispersed. When it fell on ordinary soldiers, it was completely fatal. In the blink of an eye, the blue arrow kept shooting soldiers one after another. It had flown dozens of meters in the crowd. The electric arcs lingered, not only in a straight line, but also along the way. All the soldiers nearby lost their lives under the electric arcs. Perhaps some people survived, but there was no such thing as luck on the battlefield. The soldiers of Snow Country, who had completely gone mad, rushed over under the command of the officers at all costs. In a flash, they trampled the wounded who fell on the ground to pieces. In the real despair, the fierceness of the soldiers of Snow Country had been completely stimulated. In front of Li Tianlan, the faces of every soldier of Snow Country were full of fear of death, but also with hysterical ferocity. He shot the arrow and didn't even bother to look at the result. The rainstorm string, which was famous in the dark world, flashed with silver light. The whole bow began to stretch in his hand, and the silver light flickered slightly. The extremely old and heavy bow began to elongate, becoming slender, ferocious, and extremely dangerous in the silver light. He held the rainstorm string, which had completely changed, and pulled the bow. The blue electric arcs began to twine in his bloody hands again. "Young master, take a break. Let me do it." Li Wangxing rushed to Li Tianlan's side and said in a hoarse voice. His silver-gray robe was spotless in the chaos, and lines of faintly flashing lines were shining on the robe. This was his four spirits armor, Black Tortoise, codenamed Immortal. The Black Tortoise armor did not have the stealth of Azure Dragon, or the extreme lethality of Vermilion Bird. It was known as Immortal, which represented absolute defense. When the lines on this silver-gray robe were all lit, it could even withstand the full attack of an invincible realm expert. When they left Reki City, Li Wangxing once wanted to give this robe to Li Tianlan. He didn't say much at that time, but Li Tianlan didn't take it. Along the way, Li Tianlan had been fighting in the front. When they were about to approach Mormons, Li Wangxing obviously had to go all out to cooperate with Yi. They led Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, Black Tortoise, and all the members of the Terracotta Army to completely break through the Snow Country Army in front of them. Li Tianlan shook his head. The surroundings were too chaotic, and he almost had no energy to speak loudly. The machine gun in his hand roared desperately and fired the last bullet. The silver light began to flash on his wrist. Falling stars, which had obviously been damaged because of the combination with Blue Sky Underworld in the Battle of the Date of Death, appeared in his hand. The cold light flowed on the blade. Li Tianlan said something. His voice was so soft that Li Wangxing couldn't hear it at all, but his meaning was extremely obvious. The sharp silver light swept through the crowd. Li Tianlan's speed suddenly accelerated. The sword energy rose into the sky, and the silver light continued to spread. Beside Li Tianlan, Lin Yuxian suddenly let out a long roar, and his figure closely followed Li Tianlan. 24 moves of sword. 24 moves of sword. The sword energy of the same origin began to converge in the charge side by side. The sharp sword light splashed wildly like a rainstorm. Dongqing Rushi followed the two of them, and almost all her pressure was borne by Li Tianlan. In this way, the genius woman of Jade Pool could be more focused on killing. Black Tortoise, Vermilion Bird, Azure Dragon. The three groups of Terracotta Army began to gather. At the beginning of the war, these super elites of the Terracotta Army were undoubtedly in the best state. They didn't feel tired, and they didn't even have much psychological pressure. For them, as long as they were not dead and could still move, they would always be in the peak state. Li Wangxing led the three groups of people forward crazily. The super elites of the three groups followed him. Artillery fire flashed, and the savage killing tore the crowd in front of them apart in an instant. Yi's body rose into the air. The strange blue arrows whistled in the sky. Every time the arrows penetrated and exploded, it meant that a large number of Snow Country's troops fell. As for the others, there was nothing else. That was all Li Tianlan had now. Less than 50 people. And the other elites who followed him had all fallen on the battlefield. Li Tianlan had reflected on it. For people who had never really experienced a large-scale and tragic war, they would never think of the grandeur and cruelty when the war broke out, so they would subconsciously overestimate their strength. In fact, this lone army of hundreds of people did play an unexpected role. The defeat of the 6 armies of Snow Country almost completely ruined Snow Country's plan to march into Reki City. Because of this, Snow Country mobilized all its troops and began to attack Mormons when no one faced that strange failure. At this moment, there were less than 50 people around Li Tianlan, but they gathered in the battlefield of hundreds of thousands of people. Not to mention that not all of these 50 people were top experts. Even if Li Tianlan entered the Invincible Realm, or even reached the peak of the Invincible Realm, these 50 people were all at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm, or even a half-step Invincible Realm. In this vast battlefield he couldn't do anything. Then what was the point of coming here? Li Tianlan thought about this question countless times, but he never had an answer. Perhaps the most sensible thing to do was to return to Reki City after he defeated the 6 armies of Snow Country. In this way, with him and the Terracotta Army in Reki City, at least there would be some power to defend against foreign enemies. After Snow Country's plan failed, Reki City was more stable. Li Tianlan did not deny the benefits of doing so. It was just that he couldn't do it. He didn't know the meaning of coming to Mormons at all costs. Maybe it was really meaningless. But he just wanted to come and see. The killing kept moving forward. Screams, roars, curses, and begs for mercy. The sound of blood splashing and bones breaking could be heard. The sound of gunshots and cannons. The world was chaotic. The chaotic sound completely occupied everything. At some point, more and more soldiers of Snow Country rushed over. There was more than one army. There were 2, 3, and 5. The densely packed army was like a vast and mighty ocean, and after an unknown period of time, it had turned into a tidal wave that seemed to be able to devour everything. But Li Tianlan suddenly felt relaxed. The faces of the soldiers of Snow Country flashed before his eyes. The anger on their faces had disappeared, replaced by surprise, confusion, helplessness, and panic. The fighting intent began to disappear from them. More and more troops rushed over. They rushed to Li Tianlan and other places. Li Tianlan rushed up against the tide. The people directly opposite him began to fight with him. But the people behind him deliberately bypassed Li Tianlan and continued to rush forward. Their direction was getting farther and farther away from Mormons. Li Tianlan stopped in a daze. The team defended where they were. In the rumbling footsteps, countless troops of Snow Country bypassed them and rushed over. Li Tianlan and Lin Yuxian looked at each other and asked subconsciously, "What happened?" It seems that something big has happened in Snow Country. At present, their army seems to be withdrawing from Mormons. Li Tianlan was shocked. Withdrawing from Mormons. Everyone knew what it meant. Not only Snow Country, but anyone who withdrew from Mormons at this time would admit their failure after paying a huge, or even extremely heavy price. There was Snow Country. The mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops, the death of the 8 marshals, and the tragic casualties were all enough to make the national power of Snow Country retreat for many years in an instant. At such a price, the party with the largest and strongest power actually wanted to withdraw? If Snow Country kept investing its troops in Mormons, it was likely to become the final winner. The Wang family of Beihai was very strong. The Samsara Palace was very strong. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was very strong. But there were many people in Snow Country. Hundreds of thousands of people rushed forward one by one. Wang Tianzong would be exhausted. When the victory was in hand, why did Snow Country withdraw? Li Tianlan took a step forward and suddenly raised his head. The stars were shining in the vast night sky with starlight. An almost invisible and incorporeal sword intent spread toward them silently. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. The next second, Lin Yuxian also seemed to feel something and looked up at the sky. Then it was Li Wangsheng. Then it was Yi, who was powerful but didn't know much about the 24 moves of sword. Then it was Dongqing Rushi. The vast sword intent spread over quietly. It was fierce, sharp, and shattered everything. This was the purest 24 moves of sword. The sword intent was vast and majestic. Some sword energy fell in front of Li Tianlan and froze the void. The tide-like army of Snow Country directly collided with the sword energy. Broken corpses and blood flew in an instant. The extremely fierce sword energy protected Li Tianlan and others, and then spread along the army of Snow Country. In the blink of an eye, it had spread dozens of meters away. The army of Snow Country rushed into the field covered by the sword energy in a panic, and then they were torn apart and fell down. Before Li Tianlan and others could react, the front of the sword energy was already full of corpses. The army of Snow Country finally realized something, but no one made any comments about it. The officers at the top did not give any orders, so a large number of troops directly bypassed the area after a slight pause and rushed forward. The night was slightly distorted. Li Tianlan stared at a certain point in the night sky. The figures of a man and 2 women suddenly and naturally appeared in the night sky. Li Tianlan had been looking in this direction, but he did not notice how they appeared. The 3 of them were like shadows condensed in the night sky, standing there silently. Then Lin Yuxian exclaimed, "Dad!" In the night sky, Lin Fengting stood at the forefront and looked at Lin Yuxian. He frowned and felt a little helpless. The master of Samsara Palace, who appeared at the same time as him, was looking at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan looked at flaming fire. His pupils contracted slightly. He was a little confused and understood. The sword energy all over the sky was still lingering. It was the purest 24 moves of sword, and also the sword energy that really belonged to the invincible realm. The power of this sword energy, even if it was not at the peak of the invincible realm, was not far from it, and could steadily enter the divine list. The source of this sword energy did not belong to Lin Fengting, or the master of Samsara Palace. It belonged to Flaming Fire, the invincible realm. And it was Flaming Fire who was close to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan finally understood why Qin Weibai had never been worried about her safety. He also finally understood that among the 12 supermasters, Qin Weibai was the only one who followed Flaming Fire, even though a female supermaster like Horsewoman ranked ahead of Flaming Fire. A bodyguard close to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan's brain was a little confused. He felt a sense of familiarity in this sword intent. This familiarity was not the sword intent of the 24 moves of sword, but the sword energy that had firmly guarded him on the night of the fallen sun when he confronted Wang Tianzong and deity. At that time, he also wondered who this person was. Because that person was very strong, but it would not be the master of Samsara Palace, because the other party was obviously weaker than the master of Samsara Palace. Now Li Tianlan finally understood. That night, it was Flaming Fire who watched him in the dark. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the cold and elegant face full of mature charm. His gaze was not covetous or anything else. In his extremely focused gaze, there was still doubt deep in his eyes. Lin Fengting and the master of Samsara Palace landed on the ground. Flaming Fire stood quietly behind the master of Samsara Palace, maintaining her sword energy. Li Tianlan was still looking at her. He suddenly asked, "Who are you?" Flaming Fire lowered her eyelids and said nothing. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became sharp. He recognized Flaming Fire's sword energy. Thinking of that night, he naturally had a doubt that had always been hidden in his heart. That night, when he confronted deity and felt Flaming Fire's sword energy, Li Tianlan clearly perceived his swordsmanship from it. That sword energy belonged to the 24 moves of sword. But the core sword intent was definitely Li Tianlan's own path. Flaming Fire? He really didn't have much contact with Flaming Fire. In Li Tianlan's impression, every time he saw her, she didn't even give him a good look. "Who the hell are you?" Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. "I'm Flaming Fire." Flaming Fire's tone was calm and erratic, with alienation. She had many identities. Most of the time, she was the supermaster of Samsara Palace. Sometimes, she was the master of Samsara Palace. If she wanted, she could also be the wife of the commander of Dark Knights. But in her heart, she was Flaming Fire who followed the boss. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Flaming Fire's beautiful eyes and remained silent. Flaming Fire no longer concealed her true strength. That night, many things of Samsara Palace had emerged in front of him. Li Tianlan didn't have the excitement and sense of accomplishment of solving some puzzles. When the other party revealed more and more of her secrets, the only thing he felt was a kind of panic that he couldn't explain. That was the feeling of loss. It seemed that something was passing by him unconsciously, like quiet time, like the cold wind, like the wind, like the snow and moon. He couldn't see it. He couldn't touch it, but it was passing by every moment. Before Li Tianlan could speak, the voice of the master of Samsara Palace had sounded. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet and a little cold. Li Tianlan glanced at her, and he looked a little hesitant. When the war broke out, he woke up from the hypnosis state, which even included his meeting with the master of Samsara Palace. Now he couldn't even be sure whether his memory of the night he met with the master of Samsara Palace was true or not. Li Tianlan shook his head. "I want to see it." "If you have seen it, then let's go," the master of Samsara Palace said coldly. Li Tianlan looked at her quietly and didn't speak. Around them, countless troops of Snow Country rushed over. Inside the sword energy, the atmosphere was a little cold. Lin Fengting coughed, gave Lin Yuxian a wink and walked in another direction. Lin Yuxian touched his nose and followed his father. Li Wangsheng and Yi led the Terracotta Army. Dongqing Rushi also wanted to go, but she didn't know where to go. She took 2 steps casually. Li Tianlan waved his hand. "You stay here." Dongqing Rushi said obediently. She looked at the master of Samsara Palace, and then at Li Tianlan, feeling a little confused. More and more troops of Snow Country retreated. Li Tianlan glanced at the crowd outside the sword energy and took the initiative to ask, "What's going on?" "Snow Country is retreating." The voice of the master of Samsara Palace was simple. "The battlefield is so big, and everyone has so many chips. Some people enter, and some people leave. Jia Delan lost everything, and other people of Snow Country don't dare to gamble, so this is the only result." Lost everything. Li Tianlan was a little confused. The small group of elites he led was a veritable lone army. After cutting off contact with the intelligence system of Samsara Palace, they hadn't received news from the outside world for a long time. The master of Samsara Palace said, "Jia Delin is dead." It was earth-shattering. Dongqing Rushi opened her mouth wide. Li Tianlan's face changed dramatically. Jia Delin was the president of Snow Country. It was self-evident what his death meant to the whole situation of Snow Country and Eastern Europe. The news was so shocking that Li Tianlan couldn't figure out the series of possible consequences caused by it for a while. But in this way, there seemed to be a reasonable explanation for the retreat of Snow Country. In addition, Marshal Dongqing Wudi led the Black Dragon Army to sweep the south of Snow Country. Now they are only 200 miles away from Kamas, the capital of Snow Country. Marshal Dongqing once said that he would take down Kamas within 24 hours and had tea with Jia Delin in the palace of Snow Country. So when Jia Delin felt the pressure, he mobilized the 7th Corps and the 14th Corps of Snow Country to march to Reki City. As a result, there was an internal conflict between the two corps on the way. Jia Delin was assassinated in the chaos. Faced with this situation, other high-level officials of Snow Country made the decision to give up Mormons and transfer the nearby troops back to defend against Marshal Dongqing. The master of Samsara Palace paused and whispered, "Snow Country is finished." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He didn't expect that Jia Delin would be assassinated. And he didn't expect that Dongqing Wudi would send troops to Snow Country. There were too many details hidden in the concluding words of the master of Samsara Palace. Li Tianlan thought quietly, and his heart was complicated. How could there be no risk in a war? Even the victorious generals would be defeated and killed. Snow Country was a superpower with a particularly strong military force. If Dongqing Wudi sent troops to Snow Country and won, it would be a great achievement. But if he failed, he would be doomed eternally. As a result, he did so. It had been less than 24 hours since the war in Eastern Europe broke out. Dongqing Wudi, who was in Yuzhou, had fought to a place less than 200 kilometers away from Kamas. What did this mean? It meant that Dongqing Wudi didn't hesitate at all when he got the news. He set off in the shortest time, gave the order in the shortest time, assembled the army in the shortest time, and launched the war in the shortest time. At that time, Li Huaxing, who was in Reki City, was not in danger, and his actions were too late to stop any meeting. Li Tianlan naturally knew the risks he had to bear. He turned his head and looked in the direction of Mormons. What was the man who was taking root in Snow Country and approaching Kamas, the capital of Snow Country, thinking at this moment? A warm little hand held Li Tianlan's palm. Dongqing Rushi blinked at him and whispered, "Dad is here." "Yes." Li Tianlan whispered, "He's here." The master of Samsara Palace quickly glanced at the hands of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi, and said calmly, "This is not a battlefield you can participate in now. I told you that the final battle has nothing to do with you. Go back." "No," Li Tianlan said without hesitation. "I said that even if it's meaningless for me to come here, I have to see it." He paused for a moment before he continued. The master of Samsara Palace's voice trembled slightly. "See me?" Li Tianlan didn't speak. "No matter who I see." The master of Samsara Palace laughed self-mockingly. "After the war, little Bai will come back to you. You want to see Mr. Lin, and now you see him. You want to see me, and now you see me. You want to see Flaming Fire, and Flaming Fire is also here. As for Tribulation, he's not in Mormons now. He left after killing Arsis and 3,000 of the most elite saint warriors of the Vatican. His whereabouts are unknown. Except for these, there should be no one worth seeing in Mormons now. I still have to see." Li Tianlan's tone was calm. "I said go back." The master of Samsara Palace's voice suddenly rose and became sharp. Li Tianlan looked into her eyes without fear. "Why?" The master of Samsara Palace's chest rose and fell gently. "I brought people here and sacrificed hundreds of lives. I'm not sure if it's meaningful, but now I'm going back without entering Mormons." Li Tianlan laughed self-mockingly. "Then it's really meaningless. Even if you go to Mormons, you can't do anything." The master of Samsara Palace's voice was cold and almost mean. "Then I want to go too," Li Tianlan said quietly. He didn't emphasize anything, but he had to go to Mormon's. This idea was so strong that he couldn't tell why, but he just wanted to go, regardless of everything. The master of Samsara Palace's eyes were in a trance. It was still dark in front of her, but the boundless deep everlasting night seemed to be covered with flying snow. The vast whiteness shrouded them, dispelling time. That night many years ago, she seemed to be standing in the snow, stopping that man. Don't go, please. I brought people here. What's the point of going back now? Even if you go, you can't do anything. Then I want to go too. Time flew. Countless pictures began to overlap. The master of Samsara Palace laughed. Her eyes were extremely sad. She didn't know if she was wrong today, but she was wrong back then. In the snow that year, he went to the place he wanted to go. After all, it was meaningful. The meaning of everything was the end. He arrived there. Then he died in her arms. Go back. The master of Samsara Palace murmured. Her tone was so soft that it was almost pleading. Li Tianlan's heart seemed to be twitching violently. The severe pain made his body shake slightly. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace's eyes and said in a hoarse voice, I won't go back, and I have a request. What? The master of Samsara Palace was in a daze. Let me. He stared deeply into the master of Samsara Palace's eyes. Look at your face. The master of Samsara Palace's body stiffened for a moment. Flaming Fire's body also stiffened for a moment. Time was short. Every minute and every second. After a long time, the master of Samsara Palace nodded gently. Okay. Li Tianlan's hand trembled. The master of Samsara Palace reached out and took off her cloak. She put her palm on the mask in front of her and slowly took it off. The true face of the master of Samsara Palace appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Time seemed to be passing mercilessly. The face in front of him was a little swollen, and the skin was loose. But the facial features were delicate, and he could vaguely see the appearance of the past. The master of Samsara Palace looked at Li Tianlan and smiled. Am I disappointing you? Li Tianlan shook his head. He was really not disappointed, but somehow his heart was empty. The master of Samsara Palace put on the mask again. Li Tianlan took a step back and almost fell into Dongqing Rushi's arms. In the faint sound of the wind, he murmured in a low voice. Only Dongqing Rushi could hear it. It's all fake. His weak body struggled twice and barely recovered his strength. The mighty army of Snow Country was still retreating. The boundless crowd spread over from afar, and there was no end in sight. Vaguely, the fight in Mormon's ahead was still going on. Li Tianlan straightened up and said with difficulty, Enter the city. I told you can't go. This place has nothing to do with you. The master of Samsara Palace frowned. I told you, enter the city. Li Tianlan suddenly became extremely furious. His eyes were red, and he stared at the master of Samsara Palace. His face was even a little ferocious. Enter the city. The master of Samsara Palace's body shook slightly, and she lowered her head. Flaming Fire stood beside her motionless. Li Tianlan ignored her and strode in the direction of Mormon's. A faint sigh rang out behind him. The voice of the master of Samsara Palace was quiet and cold. Then enter the city. In the war and smoke thousands of miles away, the reunion of the father and son was not reprimanded as others had imagined. The sword energy filled the eyes of the father and son. The figures of Lin Fengting and Lin Yuxian disappeared from everyone's sight. Lin Fengting looked at the retreating army of Snow Country in front of him, and was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. I didn't let you come, but you still came. How do you feel along the way? Lin Yuxian was stunned. He opened his mouth but did not make a sound. He stood where he was deep in thought. How did he feel? He had too many feelings along the way. He thought he could describe all his emotions, but when the words came to his mouth, he did not know how to say them. The scenes replayed in his mind. Li Tianlan ordered to set off in the conference room of Reki City. In the pervading flames of war, his figure stood on the roof of the car. Under the illumination of the sword light, the team of hundreds of people broke through the defense line of the army. The roaring marshal fell to the ground with his eyes open. Countless feelings and words were brewing in his heart, but he really did not know what to say for a while. If you can't say it, it seems that you really have feelings. Lin Fengting laughed. Do you remember the question I asked you before the chaos in Eastern Europe? Yes. Lin Yuxian hesitated and nodded. Before the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out, he met Li Tianlan as Qin Weibai's younger brother, and awkwardly called Li Tianlan, who was younger than him, brother-in-law. At that time, Lin Fengting once told him to think about his future path. Have you thought about it? Lin Fengting looked at his son with soft eyes. Lin Yuxian hesitated and whispered, Dad, I want to stay in Zhongzhou State and Tiannan. Lin Fengting sighed softly. The reason why he did not let Lin Yuxian participate in the current chaos was that he did not want to let him face life and death that no one could control, and he did not want to hear Lin Yuxian's current decision. The extremely wild war was enough to burn everyone's will. The Lin clan was hiding from the world. However, the wild and passionate battle could burn Lin Yuxian's mind. The war was like a raging fire, burning everything. It could be foreseen that Lin Yuxian would experience a lot in the future. How could a person who had experienced these be willing to hide from the world? Lin Yuxian had a lot of feelings tonight. He might not be able to say these feelings clearly now, but they were enough to prompt him to make a final decision. I'm really tired. Lin Fengting shook his head. Dad. Lin Yuxian wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Lin Fengting glanced at him and chuckled. If you decide to stay, then I will do it according to my original idea. I will hand over the Lin clan to Qin Weibai for the next 20 years. After 20 years, I will hand over the Lin clan to your sister. As for you, if you want to stay, then stay. The Lin clan has not had a branch in Zhongzhou State for many years, but our original roots are still here. At this moment, he thought of the luck that the master of Samsara Palace had mentioned, the white mist in the manor, and Li Tianlan who carried the dragon vein on his back. Lin Fengting thought quietly and said calmly, You can stay in Zhongzhou State, but I hope you can know why you are staying in Zhongzhou State. What makes you make up your mind and your future goals are two different things. For the Lin clan. Lin Yuxian hesitated. For Zhongzhou State. Lin Fengting laughed. For the Lin clan. He was not surprised by this sentence. For Zhongzhou State. Only this sentence could make him feel a little relieved. This at least meant that his son had matured a lot overnight. Not far away, Li Tianlan roared at the master of Samsara Palace. He shook off the master of Samsara Palace and strode forward. Lin Fengting looked at this scene quietly. There was some pity in his eyes. Finally, I still have to enter the city. The battle in the city was getting more and more fierce. Snow Country had issued an order to abandon Mormons. The army was retreating. However, it was extremely troublesome for hundreds of thousands of troops to retreat. After all, only the army that had not officially joined the battle could go back as soon as possible. The legions and Mormons were still fighting in a daze. The commanders of several legions had already died. The high-level officers were incomplete, and the middle-level officers suffered heavy casualties. In a short time, effective orders could not be transmitted at all. The soldiers in the city could only fight and keep fighting in the face of the enemy. The phalanx formed by the Purgatory of Heaven capital had shrunk by more than half. Countless elites had stayed in this broken city forever. They fought with Snow Country, the Beihai Corps, the Samsara Palace, and the Polar Ground Alliance. Deity always stood at the forefront, but countless attacks appeared from all directions. The Purgatory of Heaven capital kept losing members. Only the sword intent in the front was always strong. Since the beginning of the war, this had always been the most powerful sword light on the battlefield. It surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Even Tyrant in his heyday did not dare to charge head-on in the face of this sword light. Deity's face had turned pale. The vast sword energy began to become messy. After fighting for nearly a day and a night, his body, which had been stretched taut all this time, finally began to gradually collapse. His condition was deteriorating, and the range of the majestic sword chi was also shrinking. However, the enemies in front of him were still everywhere, and there was no end to them. In the distance, the crowd of Snow Country was shouting something, and their voices were getting louder and louder. Gradually, the army of Snow Country began to retreat. However, the Samsara Palace and the North Sea Corps, who had long been in a killing frenzy, were desperately killing all the enemies. As Snow Country retreated, the whole situation became more and more chaotic. Deity looked at the situation in front of him. After a long silence, he said softly, "Daybreak." "Your Highness." Daybreak, who was covered in blood and extremely weak, walked over. "We lost," Deity whispered. Daybreak was silent. After a long time, he said in a complicated tone, "Yes, I lost. I don't like this kind of battlefield, because in this kind of battlefield, even if you want to admit defeat, you can't." God said softly, "But there is still a chance after all. Snow Country is leaving and we admit defeat. This is our only chance." Daybreak looked up at Deity. Deity's face was full of exhaustion. "So admit defeat. Take advantage of the chaos. Let's retreat." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly stopped. At that moment, his pale face became paler. As if he had seen something incredible, he raised his head and looked at the sky in the distance. The next second, almost everyone seemed to feel something and looked up at the same time. Outside the city, the master of Samsara Palace, who was about to enter the city, raised her head, and her eyes gradually became hot. Li Tianlan's eyes were bright. Lin Fengting's expression was complicated. Tyrant kept rubbing his wristband in the city. Cheers gradually appeared in the Wang family of Beihai. An incomparably quiet atmosphere suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Everyone was looking at the sky in the distance. The sky in the distance was moving. To be exact, it was tearing. The vast world seemed to have completely disappeared in an instant. The unimaginably majestic sword energy surged from afar like a tsunami. The sword energy tore the sky into the shape of a sword. The sword light was flying. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Countless sword lights were burning in the night. The whole distant sky was lit up. Countless sword lights were flying in the air, almost occupying the whole world. There were more and more sword lights. They were dense and spread all the way from the sky to the earth, like a storm that could swallow heaven and earth. The storm was getting clearer and clearer. Swords appeared clearly in everyone's sight one after another. Countless sword shadows danced and shuttled back and forth between heaven and earth, spanning thousands of meters. In the magnificent sword curtain that covered heaven and earth, there seemed to be someone walking in the sky, 1,000 meters in one step. Wherever he passed, countless retreating Snow Country troops were completely torn apart and destroyed. So the sword curtain turned into a blood-red color. The blood-red light filled the sky. Daybreak was dumbfounded. Deity's body trembled slightly. Everyone was staring at the figure in the sword curtain. "The chosen one." Deity's voice sounded, with great pressure and difficulty. Plains, mountains, seas, heaven and earth. They were all under his feet. On the night of August 24th, when Snow Country admitted defeat and left completely, from Reki City to Mormons. After crossing thousands of miles, the only chosen one in several eras officially entered the arena. In the scarlet sword curtain that spread over the whole world, he, known as the Sword Emperor, stood at the highest point, overlooking countless years and countless eras. Supremacy. Chapter 598. Countless unimaginable sword lights were stained with blood and converged into a storm. It seemed to be falling from the sky, but it also seemed to be rising from the plains. The storm that connected the heavens and the earth howled and tore apart every inch of space. The void was constantly trembling, and one sword shadow after another covered the sky and the ground. It was plain and natural, but it had an irresistible majesty. Everyone was watching this scene. The sword energy was supreme and arrogant. The Sword Emperor, who stood in the sky and casually carried this sword intent, meant that he was the most powerful, and even the most dominant power in this era. No one was his opponent anymore. All the people in front of him were no longer obstacles. Under the cold sword edge of Jiuzhou, they were all non-entities. An earth-shattering curtain of swords swept over like a storm. The infinite sword energy was getting closer and closer to Mormons. Mormons was getting closer and closer to Wang Tianzong. That unparalleled power brought only despair to the people who saw it. Looking at this city, Wang Tianzong was also touched. Because he was standing too high, countless figures became extremely small in his sight. The sword intent roared around him and spread out. The irresistible sharpness appeared in every corner of the wilderness. It was a storm, a tsunami, a thunderbolt, and a surging tide. Wang Tianzong's figure moved forward in the air. He walked into the city. The magnificent sword light swept through the city at the same time. The whole city trembled under the sword intent. The space was torn apart, and more sword lights appeared. The dead void spread everywhere, and the earth was torn apart. The infinite sword intent drew hideous cracks on the ground. In the broken city, countless buildings fell down one after another. In the chaotic roar, countless people died. The people who had no time to retreat fell down in large numbers. Snow Country, Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Samsara Palace, Mormon's purgatory seemed to come alive in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it was dyed by a blood-red color. Wang Tianzong looked down at the city and watched the sword light raging in the city. A city, a country, a grass, and a tree were all under the North Sea sword. Wang Tianzong looked calm, but the light in his eyes became obviously relaxed. It was not until this moment that he was finally sure that he had completely crossed the almost impossible chasm and truly stood at the supreme height. No one was his opponent. Deity couldn't. The master of Samsara Palace could not do that. Lin Fengting couldn't. Even if everyone attacked together, it wouldn't work. His condition was perfect, and it could even be said that it was unprecedented. The world was quiet and so fragile. With a sword in his hand, he could sweep the entire dark world. The coldness of the 9 states trembled violently behind him, and its fighting spirit soared into the sky. Wang Tianzong lowered his head. That day was destined to be the most glorious peak of the Wang family of Beihai in hundreds of years. From this moment on, everything on Mount Dibing in Beihai would be supreme like the sword light in his hand. As long as he was there, all the glory in front of him would never fall. Did you see that? Wang Tianzong muttered to himself. I did it. From today on, the Wang family of Beihai will become the only will of the dark world. Do you see? No one heard his words clearly, and no one would know who he was referring to when he said you guys. His eyes scanned the city below. An incomparably sharp sword light boiled in the center of the city, its sharpness soaring into the sky. Wang Tianzong looked at him quietly. After many years, deity of the purgatory of heaven capital took off his black robe and mask. The ridiculously large sickle was held tightly in his hand. His face was pale, and his appearance was not handsome. But at this moment, his figure became the most real sword light in Wang Tianzong's eyes. Wang Tianzong's figure slowly fell. As he fell, countless sword energy under his feet were dropped in an instant. The invisible sword shadow made a sharp collision sound. Countless sword energy was compressed into one place, and the storm turned into a blood-colored column. As Wang Tianzong fell, it became shorter and more condensed. Deity waved his sickle. The sword energy, which used to be the sharpest in the dark world, became pure defense. His palm began to make a seal. Behind him, nearly 1,000 remaining elites of Daybreak, Dawn, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were making seals. With deity's sword energy beyond the peak of the invincible realm as the core, everyone's sword energy gathered toward deity's body at the same time. All-embracing collection. Life-prolonging immortality. Deity stood at the forefront of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The light, which seemed to be completely burning, burst out in an instant and covered everyone in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Wang Tianzong in the air seemed to make a sound, simple and without any emotion. The red storm of sword intent compressed as he fell, and the ground began to tremble. His voice rang out, resounding throughout the city, indifferent and soothing. I gave you a chance, he said quietly. When the notice of the Wang family of Beihai spread throughout Eastern Europe, Wang Tianzong's will had been expressed very clearly. They all surrendered or died under the sword of Beihai. No one chose to surrender. So, Wang Tianzong's voice was calm. Go to hell. His falling figure stagnated in the air and stopped at a height that everyone could see. The majestic sword energy, which had been compressed to the extreme, exploded in all directions like a cannonball. The sound was earth-shattering. In an instant, the entire street was completely overturned by the sword. In the complete chaos, a large amount of dust was flying. The almost world-destroying sword light swept directly to the front of the formation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Thousands of people and deity worked together. The strongest immortality seal of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, improved by the 24 moves of sword, was shining. The sword light arrived in an instant. Without the slightest delay, there was no sign of obstruction. The unimaginable sword light directly tore the defense of the immortality seal. The sword light was surging. The city was collapsing. Nearly 1,000 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital were lifted into the sky by the sword. Countless people seemed to want to struggle. The lightning and the raging fire lit up for a moment. Then the sword light rushed over. In an instant, the whole street was quiet. Blood was spilled in the sword energy, and the flesh and blood were torn into powder. Countless elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital disappeared completely in this sword. Under the surging sword energy, deity's body was directly lifted up by the sword energy, flew nearly 100 meters in the air, and fell heavily behind him. Daybreak and dawn were protected behind him. He could only protect the two of them. His body fell in a ruin 100 meters away. Smoke and dust were flying wildly. He struggled to stand up and raised the huge sickle in his hand, which was not a murderous weapon but was equally sharp. Crack! The sickle broke at the moment he raised it. Before the broken weapon fell to the ground, it had turned into dust and was flying everywhere. At this moment, everyone's heart became extremely cold. Everyone knew that Wang Tianzong was very strong. But perhaps no one could imagine that Wang Tianzong could be so strong, except for the master of Samsara Palace. He was a perfect chosen one. Even in Li Tianlan's mind, he could only get the conclusion that he was far beyond deity. But how much was the so-called far beyond? Now when he really showed it, the absurd feeling of being in a nightmare almost made him completely suffocate. Deity naturally did not expect that Wang Tianzong would be so strong. He gained something on the night of the trial day, and finally broke through to the peak of the invincible realm yesterday. He could vaguely see the end now, and he seemed to be only half a step away from the real chosen one. Even if he was not really at his peak now, but when he was prepared and gathered nearly 1,000 elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to form a formation, when the immortality formation was fully exerted, his defense could not be so fragile. But now the result was extremely naked in front of deity. The immortality formation was broken. Wang Tianzong only made one move. No. Wang Tianzong did not even draw his sword. Even a fool knew that the Sword Emperor without a sword and the Sword Emperor with a sword were two completely different states. Deity looked at the metal powder in his hand dully. He raised his head little by little and looked at Wang Tianzong in the air. A mouthful of blood sprayed from his mouth, and his aura directly declined. The Beihai Corps was cheering almost crazily. Everyone's face was completely distorted, and they almost completely lost their minds. An invisible sword intent completely protected them in it. They were in the safest position, looking up at the man in the ancient costume who looked like an emperor in the air, and their eyes were full of fanaticism. That was their majesty, the strongest foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, and the supreme deity in all of their hearts. When he stood on the top of the world, everyone in the Wang family of Beihai also stood on the top. This was a real glory that could not be described in any words. At this moment, standing on the battlefield that was still fighting, many iron-blooded soldiers in the Beihai Corps, who dared to rush forward against the sword intent of deity, and dared to fight with anyone regardless of their life and death, had tears in their eyes. It was not because their majesty had become the chosen one. It was because the current chosen one was their majesty of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong glanced at deity. He took a step forward. That simple step seemed to have crossed half a street block. Hundreds of meters away, Wang Tianzong was already standing in front of deity. His figure was suspended in the air, looking down at deity, who had a weak aura. Deity looked up at him. He was not used to looking up at anyone in his life. He did not want anyone to be above him. If not, he would not have tried to drag down the entire Wang family of Beihai. But now Wang Tianzong was standing on his head. This feeling was clearer than it had been many years ago. He looked up and could only see the soles of Wang Tianzong's shoes. The strong sense of shame made his eyes bloodshot. and his expression became more paranoid and silent. Wang Tianzong looked at him. There was a long silence. He finally spoke. His calm voice resounded throughout the city, as if he was telling the world a truth that had been hidden for many years. I have been waiting for this day for many years. His voice was quiet, with a little tiredness. It was the melancholy after waiting for a long time. When I saw you more than 3 years ago, I wanted to kill you. Until now. The thing I want to do most after the breakthrough is to kill you. Do you know what it is? Deity did not speak. In his silence, Wang Tianzong revealed the answer to the mystery. It's been a long time, Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu. 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 His voice was clear and light, rolling through the whole city, but like a thunder, it suddenly exploded in everyone's ears. Li Tianlan, who had just entered the manor, suddenly looked up and looked into the distance. He stood in the manor, and countless white mist moved with his figure. The vague mist did not affect his vision at all. Everything in front of him was extremely clear. Li Kuangtu. The Li family. Li Kuangtu. He looked up in that direction in a daze. For a moment, he seemed to have lost all his soul. Everyone around him was looking at him. Dongqing Rushi was in a daze. Lin Yuxian opened his mouth wide, and his face was full of disbelief. Lin Fengting sighed softly. The master of Samsara Palace stood where she was, and no one knew what she was thinking. Flaming Fire was still expressionless. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's back and was a little worried. Countless emotions surged in his heart, from childhood to adolescence to the present. The hardships he had suffered, the tears he had shed, the happiness he had, and the treasures he had lost. Countless emotions kept gathering and turning into an extremely abstract and complicated word. Father. He thought of the trial day. At that time, the man who was still deity stood in front of him and said that the Li family was his Li family. He stood there in a daze, looking in the direction where the sword energy broke out. If you didn't die, why didn't you come back after so many years? If you really didn't die, why did you watch the Li family fall to such a level? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. If you are really alive, of course, the Li family is yours. But what position do I have in your heart? Li Tianlan suddenly felt that he was very pitiful. In everyone's eyes he was really pitiful. Li Tianlan took a step forward. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace appeared in front of him. Li Tianlan looked at him. After a long time he laughed. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace, looked at Flaming Fire, looked at Qin Weibai, and looked at Lin Fengting. His eyes seemed to be burning. You already knew. The master of Samsara Palace did not answer this question, but calmly asked, Where are you going? He is there. Of course I have to go there. Li Tianlan continued to walk. You can't go. The master of Samsara Palace's tone was indifferent and cold. There seemed to be needles hidden in his eyes. His eyes were flowing and sharp. If I don't let you go, you can't go anywhere. Li Tianlan ignored him and continued to move forward. An incomparably solid domain appeared around him. The surrounding space suddenly compressed and completely froze him in place. The 10th unique domain. This was the most powerful unique technique of Kunlun City. Ironically, the 10th unique domain built by the master of Samsara Palace was even more powerful than the 10th unique domain of Gu Xingyun, the strongest in Kunlun City. Li Tianlan struggled violently and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him coldly. You stay here, she said quietly. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at the area where the sword intent gathered. There was no echo in that area. In an angle that Li Tianlan could not see, deity slowly stood up. Dawn had been seriously injured and was in a coma. Daybreak, who was slightly stronger and was about to enter the invincible realm, struggled. Deity reached out and pulled him up. When their palms touched each other, Daybreak's wrist trembled slightly. A faint shadow flew out of his hand and fell on Deity's hand. That was the murderous weapon of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The shadow was torn. Wang Tianzong watched this scene quietly. Facing the murderous weapon, facing Deity, there was no fluctuation in his eyes. How do you want to die? He looked at Deity, calm and heartless. The sword strike just now had fully explained his attitude. More than half of the formation of thousands of people from the purgatory of heaven capital was killed by his sword strike. At this moment, the two men, who had supported each other through trials and tribulations and laughed together for many years, met again after falling out. The so-called beauty had long disappeared. The past was like the wind. Only the resentment of the past remained and fermented to this day. Deity took a step forward. I don't accept it. His voice was low, a little ferocious and twisted. In terms of talent and perseverance, I'm not worse than you. If it weren't for her, how could I? His voice was directly interrupted by Wang Tianzong. There are not so many ifs. His voice was cold and cruel. If these ifs really exist, ignoring those opportunities and luck, you may not be worse than me today. But if those things did not happen, she will not be worse than you today. Li Guangtu laughed with an extremely complicated expression. He looked at Wang Tianzong with some pity and sympathy in his eyes. So what if he was the chosen one? There would always be times when he was helpless. He said softly and very slowly. There is not much time left for the summer solstice, right? Wang Tianzong's eyes suddenly condensed. Li Guangtu had already taken a step forward. His body suddenly rose. In an instant, the majestic sword intent suddenly burst out with his body as the center. The sword light was surging, mighty and mighty. Li Guangtu's figure disappeared. 1,000-meter-long sword suddenly flew across the sky and chopped toward Wang Tianzong. This sword was extremely heavy and simple without any fancy. But when the giant sword flew across the sky, it was incomparably majestic. Before the shock caused by deity's true identity dissipated, everyone saw this sword. Many people also recognized this sword. This was not the sword of the Li family. It was the Wang Dao sword of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's eyes had become extremely cold. The giant sword was spreading with the condensed sword energy. The tip of the sword, which was much larger than his body, appeared directly in front of him. Wang Tianzong raised his hand expressionlessly. He lifted something heavy as if it were light. It could even be said that it was effortless. He held his hand for a while. Crack! The blood light permeated the night sky. The whole space seemed to be broken in an instant by the pull of a big hand. The giant sword broke into countless pieces. Li Guangtu's body fell from the sky, covered in blood. Li Guangtu stood up with difficulty and looked at Wang Tianzong in the air. It was not until this moment that he understood how far the half-step distance between the half-step Supreme Master and the Supreme Master was. The so-called half-step distance had exceeded the distance from the Qi-controlling realm to the peak of the invincible realm. But what about him? He was still laughing, extremely comfortable. Wang Tianzong's expression was a little cold. Are you provoking me? Li Guangtu spat out a mouthful of blood with a smile and said softly. I just want to tell the world that even if I die today, even if you are invincible in the world today, it is only you who are invincible, not the swordsmanship of the Wang family of Beihai. His voice was extremely difficult. The swordsmanship of Beihai will also be vulnerable when facing a more powerful force. So the victory or defeat between you and me is not the victory or defeat between the Li family and Beihai. It's just that I'm not as good as you. Now, I'm not as good as you. Only when the dark world sees this clearly will they understand that the Wang family of Beihai is not invincible. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed. A bit of dark light came out of his eyes, and his voice was extremely cold. Does it make sense? I'm not the first chosen one in the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. And the Li family has never seen the chosen one. Li Guangtu laughed. Do you still dare to say this 20 years later? 20 years later. Are you sure that the chosen one will still be surnamed Li? Wang Tianzong seemed to be tired of arguing with Li Guangtu. He still didn't draw his sword. Instead, he raised his hand casually. The whole world seemed to become his vassal at the moment of his breakthrough. Heaven and earth condensed. Space was compressed into a sword. He waved his hand. The night sky lit up for a moment. In an instant, everything in front of everyone flew up and rushed to Wang Tianzong. The blood flowing on the ground rushed up into the sky. Drops of blood gathered and instantly turned into a river of blood across the sky. On both sides of the road, plastic bags stained with blood flew up. A soldier of Snow Country with a broken company nearby had just raised his head, but his head had disappeared. The light plastic bags turned into unparalleled sharp swords, flying and penetrating the chests of all the soldiers nearby, and rushing to Wang Tianzong. The drifting smoke and dust were frozen in the air, and turned into the shape of swords. The fallen leaves on the ground, the broken steel bars, and the broken rocks. Everything flew up and converged in the same direction. Everything in the world, it was all a sword. Wang Tianzong's palm fell. Everything flew over his body and directly shrouded the figure of God. Countless chaotic objects. Countless sharp and orderly swords. Li Kuangtu's figure was shrouded in them. Endless sword light broke out completely. The sword light was just a little bit at first. As the sword energy broke out, it continued to spread, hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands. The crystal sharp light broke everything and grew endlessly. This was God's counterattack. It was still not the swordsmanship of the Li family. The Wang family of Beihai. The 6 paths of reincarnation sword. The sword rain all over the sky fell, and was torn apart by the 6 paths of reincarnation sword. Li Kuangtu's figure was like a mad dragon rushing madly. In the extreme outbreak, he gave up all defense. Thousands of sword energy broke out completely around him in an instant, tearing everything apart. The street was shaking. The night sky was almost completely torn by the sword energy. The torrential sword energy gathered in front of God into a torrent and an ocean, rushing to Wang Tianzong's figure regardless of everything. No one dared to say that Li Kuangtu was not strong. If Wang Tianzong had not broken through, Li Kuangtu could definitely be regarded as the peak combat capability in the dark world. But in front of him, he was the chosen one. Wang Tianzong raised his palm. One punch. A wave of qi broke out between heaven and earth with his body as the center. The endless sword light was completely annihilated. Li Kuangtu's body was blown dozens of meters away by a punch, and his body was covered with blood. But he was still laughing. Laughing wildly. Wantonly. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. He never thought that when he became the chosen one, he would break the 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai with his own hands. He thought of God's words again. I just want to tell the world that even if I die today, even if you are invincible in the world today, you are invincible, not the swordsmanship of the Wang family of Beihai. Damn it. Wang Tianzong looked at the direction where God fell and slowly walked over. Daybreak staggered to his feet and seemed to want to stop him. Wang Tianzong reached out his hand casually and patted him. Bang! The ground suddenly sunk. Daybreak's whole body was pressed directly into the ground, and only his head was exposed. Wang Tianzong did not look at him. He just looked at Li Kuangtu, who fell to the ground and stood up again. His sword intent was still condensing. It was still the 6 paths of reincarnation. You didn't choose the way to die. Wang Tianzong's voice was cold, and there seemed to be endless darkness around him. I've made a choice for you. You shouldn't die so easily. He flicked his palm gently. An extremely sharp sword energy arrived in a flash. When Li Kuangtu realized something, the sword energy had directly passed through his body. The sword energy he condensed suddenly scattered, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Wang Tianzong's body continued to move forward. One of the 2 men fell to the ground, and the other stood on the ground and looked at each other. No one knew what they were thinking. Maybe they were thinking about the past. But no matter what happened in the past, today, for Li Kuangtu, the so-called Sword Emperor, was his doomsday. I can stop him. The white mist in the manor kept surging and gathering on Li Tianlan. His body kept struggling in the 10th unique domain. I said I can stop him. Let me go. I can stop him. You can't stop him. The master of Samsara Palace said coldly. I told you that you shouldn't have come here. If you hadn't come, you wouldn't have seen it. Shouldn't come? Li Tianlan stared at the master of Samsara Palace. Why shouldn't I come? Ah. What right do you have to order me not to come? I'm here now. Do you want me to watch him die? Do you know who he is to me? Let me go. Bastard, let me go. Do you know who he is to you? The master of Samsara Palace seemed to be extremely mean tonight. Her body was trembling, but it was completely covered by the black robe. All her emotions were shrouded. Her voice was mocking. Do you really know? Li Tianlan's struggle froze for a moment. Deity was Li Guangtu. But he still didn't know and wasn't sure if Li Guangtu was his father. He asked Li Honghe. Li Honghe said no. But anyway, Li Guangtu was Li Honghe's son. Li Guangtu was in Mormons tonight. He was also in Mormons. They were less than 10 kilometers apart. How could he watch Li Guangtu die in front of him? He couldn't do it. He couldn't explain it to his grandfather when he went back. He saved me. Li Tianlan growled in a low voice. Not long ago in Reki City he saved my life. Now I can save him. Let me go. I won't. The master of Samsara Palace stared into Li Tianlan's eyes. What can you do? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Save him? Even if deity was in his heyday and his sword energy combined with your sword intent, the limit you can reach is at most the state before Wang Tianzong broke through. Maybe you will be a little stronger than the current deity, but is it meaningful? And now deity is seriously injured. If you stand together, you can exert less power. Save him? Why do you save him? Just because you haven't reached the invincible realm? We still have Mr. Lin and you. Lend me a sword, just one sword. I can save him. Li Tianlan gritted his teeth. An extremely intense shame rose from his heart. His red eyes had become a little scattered. Lend him a sword. He was borrowing a sword. He wanted to save Li Guangtu. He wanted to return the favor to Li Guangtu. He wanted to ask his identity face to face. He wanted to ask the relationship between Li Guangtu and himself face to face. He could do all this, but he needed to borrow a sword. Because he didn't have the strength to borrow. To borrow. Just like a beggar, he begged the other party to lend him a sword. Chosen one? It was all bullshit. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly hated the word, chosen one. He even needed to borrow a sword. How could he call himself a chosen one? The youngest martial, the youngest combat capability of the invincible realm. The future chosen one. It was all bullshit. At the most critical moment he was still Li Tianlan. The future chosen one. It meant that he was nothing now. Li Tianlan was completely sober, but the sense of humiliation was getting stronger. But he still squeezed the words out of his mouth, word by word, frantically, blankly, self-deprecating, and crazily. Lend me your sword, please. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him. Her eyes suddenly softened, as if she felt a little sorry for him. But then she gritted her teeth. So what if I lend you a sword? I still can't stop Wang Tianzong. And that sword? Li Tianlan gritted his teeth and said, the sword that was taken from Linen. The master of Samsara Palace looked at him. Please. Li Tianlan stared into the eyes of the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace turned around. I'm sorry. That sword is mine, and Mr. Lin is my business partner. You can't convince me, and you can't convince him. I won't lend you anything. She gritted her teeth and said word by word. Okay, then let me go. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. I won't. Let me go, you bitch. I won't let you go, Li Tianlan, you bastard. Bitch, let me go. I won't. Let me go. I won't let you go. Come and kill me. Buzz. A slight buzzing sound suddenly rang out. Li Tianlan moved his wrist slightly. The silver falling stars flew out and turned into a long sword. Lin Fengting walked out of the white mist. What are you arguing about? He held the falling stars and said with a bitter smile. Li Tianlan's mouth moved, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. The master of Samsara Palace looked to the side in silence, as if she was angry. Lin Fengting raised his hand again. A green light flashed in the white mist. Blue sky underworld also flew out of Li Tianlan's body and fell into Lin Fengting's hand. The two murderous weapons twisted and extended under the stimulation of the sword intent, and turned into long swords. The shapes of the two long swords were a little irregular. This was undoubtedly the damage caused by Li Tianlan's failure to detonate the murderous weapon to kill King Tong. Do you know it? Lin Fengting held the blue sky underworld. He looked at Li Tianlan and asked. Li Tianlan glanced at the master of Samsara Palace, and didn't say anything. The master of Samsara Palace looked elsewhere, and didn't look at him. In the hands of the country, the murderous weapon is the treasure of the country. In the hands of the superpowers, it is also the last trump card. Lin Fengting said slowly, everyone knows that the blue sky underworld belongs to the Samsara Palace, but in fact, this murderous weapon is now yours. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. When the Samsara Palace got the cloud silk robe, he pointed to the master of Samsara Palace. She fought in person and even got it when she was seriously injured. The Samsara Palace lost countless elites, and the two affiliated wealthy families were wiped out. After that, the cloud silk was made into clothes, and the Samsara Palace owed countless favors. He looked at Li Tianlan. That robe is also yours. Everything the Samsara Palace has done, and all the resources in the future are also yours. He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. You're a bastard, yes. But you called her a bitch? Lin Fengting laughed. Yes, she's bitch enough. She gave you everything. Isn't that a bitch? Am I right? Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace and didn't say anything. You don't need to apologize. Lin Fengting shook his head. I don't ask you for anything. It's just that it's too late to regret some things. The space in the distance was shaking. Infinite sword intent burst out. The sword energy broke through the sky. Countless sword lights looked real and illusory under the night sky, where light and darkness intertwined. It was flawless. Li Guangtu's sword energy was completely suppressed and could hardly be felt. That was not a battle at all. Li Tianlan looked in that direction. His body was tense, and his eyes were getting colder and colder. You want to save him? Lin Fengting said. Do you know that there were many times when he wanted to kill you? The reason why you didn't die was that the bitch you called him resolved his killing intent. Li Tianlan's body suddenly shook, and he looked at the master of Samsara Palace. Really? He asked. I don't talk to bastards. The master of Samsara Palace gritted her teeth and said, Don't talk to the bitch either. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. He looked at the area where the sword intent was surging and said softly, Anyway, he saved me. So you want to save him? Lin Fengting said. Li Tianlan nodded. Even if it's to return a favor. Lin Fengting sighed and looked at the two murderous weapons in his hands. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace again. She doesn't want you to save him, not only because she doesn't want you to take risks, but also because she doesn't think it's worth it. It's not worth it for me to lend you a sword, and it's not worth it to waste the invincible sword. In her heart, Li Guangtu deserves to die. Not only Li Guangtu, but anyone who is malicious to you, even if it's just a little bit, deserves to die in her heart. The master of Samsara Palace glanced at him. Lin Fengting, who seemed to have a lot to say, hesitated. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan, and his emotions were complicated and deep. I won't lend you a sword. He looked at the area where Li Tianlan was looking. But we used to be friends. He paused, nodded, and repeated. Well, we used to be friends. The three of us, me, Li Guangtu, Wang Tianzong, and even Summer Solstice, were friends. We used to be. So he looked at Li Tianlan. Then he looked at the master of Samsara Palace. I'll go. No one knew who he was talking to, and no one knew if he was asking for the master of Samsara Palace's opinion. The master of Samsara Palace said nothing. Silence was a very subtle attitude. Lin Fengting nodded and looked at the murderous weapons in his hand again. I'm no match for Tianzong. If I go, I may lose these two murderous weapons. Are you willing to give them up? At this moment, Li Tianlan thought of Li Honghe. So he nodded and said without hesitation, I'm willing to. Whether it was worth it or not. He was willing to give them up. Because that person was called Li Guangtu. Lin Fengting sighed softly. His figure suddenly disappeared in the white mist. Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace, who deliberately ignored him. Before he could come up with the right words, an earth-shattering sword light had appeared a few miles away. The resplendent silver light seemed to spread out from the horizon. It was perfectly straight, and its sharpness was astonishing. It was upright. The 24 moves of sword. The break of the sky. Wang Tianzong, who had patiently accumulated injuries for Li Guangtu again and again, stopped. Looking at the silver light, his eyes became solemn. It was not because of the power of the sword light. It was because of the attitude of the sword light. He stretched out his hand and pointed forward. The extremely faint sword energy collided with the bright silver sharpness. In an instant, all the ruins nearby were completely shattered, and the shock wave with extreme destructive power spread out wildly. In the sound of countless collapses, a drop of blood came out of Wang Tianzong's fingertip. The shining azure light flew over after the silver light, and stuck in front of Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu, who was covered in blood and as pale as a dead man, glanced at it and smiled with difficulty. Oh, blue sky underworld. Lin Fengting's figure appeared in front of Li Guangtu with the silver light. Wang Tianzong stopped. Lin Fengting glanced at him, then at Li Guangtu, and said in a complicated tone, "Long time no see." "Yeah, long time no see. It's like a lifetime ago." Lin Fengting looked down at the falling stars in his hand and didn't speak. "Do you really want to get involved?" Wang Tianzong frowned. "I'm under the North Sea sword. If I don't surrender, I can only draw my sword to protect myself." Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong and sighed with emotion. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and whispered, "Why don't you go? Leave here, and I won't pursue anything. Now." Lin Fengting laughed. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. "If you give up martial arts, I'll allow you to leave. I'll guard your Lin clan for you from now on." His voice was calm with the last gentleness. From the moment Lin Fengting appeared in front of him, his current promise was based on the relationship of the past. Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were apologetic, really apologetic. He shook his head with a smile and whispered, "No need." Wang Tianzong looked at him and shook his head little by little. The last gentleness in his tone finally began to disappear. Guangtu broke and stood up. "After all, he's not as good as you now. I'm not surprised by your breakthrough, nor am I surprised that you're stronger than him. But you're no match for me, even if you have a murderous weapon." Wang Tianzong's voice was calm and indifferent, like the general trend. "If he can't do it, what about me?" A clear and cold voice sounded in the distance. The voice was still far away at the beginning, but as soon as the voice fell, it had already appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. The white clothes fluttered with a delicate fragrance. Today's madam of the governor of Kunlun City was no longer numb, stiff or silent. After more than 20 years, she seemed to have returned to the past and restored the nobility and pride when she was the young madam of the Li family. Li Guangtu glanced at her. Li Shi walked over and helped Li Guangtu up. Li Guangtu's body moved, and his voice was hoarse and brief. "Get out. I can't go anywhere." Li Shi looked at Li Guangtu and smiled softly. "I know you hate me. If you hate me, then hate me. Many years ago, I killed you and owed you a life. Today, I will return it to you." Li Guangtu shook off Li Shi's arm in disgust. Li Shi didn't mind. She walked to Blue Sky Underworld and looked at Lin Fengting. "Can I?" she asked softly. "Whatever." Lin Fengting was expressionless. Li Shi said "Oh" and reached out to pull out Blue Sky Underworld. Plain white hand. Dark green sword. They complemented each other. Her white dress flew. She was devastatingly beautiful. Li Guangtu looked at the red dagger that was still hanging on her waist for many years, and reached out to touch the Shadow the Ripper in his hand subconsciously. 2 half-step chosen ones. One was at the peak of the invincible realm. 3 murderous weapons. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. His expression was still indifferent and calm, just like when he fell from the sky and slaughtered most of the elites of the purgatory of half-heaven. He said End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 599. The war had stopped. The people fighting in every corner of the city had stopped. Most of the elites of the purgatory of heaven capital were killed by Wang Tianzong's sword light. A small number of survivors were also seriously injured and were trying to gather. The elites of the Samsara Palace quieted down. The elites of the Polar Ground Alliance were retreating. The vast army of Snow Country gradually rushed out of the city. Those who had left had already left. The forces who had no way to retreat still did not give up. They confronted each other and looked forward to the result of the final battle. At this moment, with the exit of Snow Country, The battle standard of the entire Mormons seemed to have once again fallen from a large-scale war to a conflict in the Dark World. At this moment, the result of the battle of ordinary elites was almost unimportant in Mormons. The real end was between Wang Tianzong, Li Kuangtu, Lin Fengting, Li Shi and the three murderous weapons. Both the enemy and the enemy. Everyone was looking forward to this battle. The peak of the invincible realm. The half-step Supreme Master. The Supreme Master. For people. 3 against 1. No matter what the result of this battle was, it would be the best in this era. Such a scene had never appeared in the Dark World for decades, even hundreds of years. The polar ice wind blew through Mormons, bringing with it broken ice and snow. There was a little flying in the deep night. The army was moving, the snow was moving, and time was moving. The rumbling of the general trend continued to roll over, resounding in the ears of every survivor. The sound was so clear, so loud. Everyone seemed to be able to see the general trend pushing forward this era. It was irreversible and powerless to change it. They were all survivors of the Dark World. On this day, the Chosen One appeared in the Wang family of Beihai, but the whole Dark World was withering and heading for the end. Scenes after scenes appeared in front of everyone's eyes when the battle stopped. Thus, everyone clearly realized something. The Wang family of Beihai stood at the center of this battle. After this battle, whether the Sword Emperor won or died, the already barren Dark World would usher in a new era in the barren. Some people were looking forward to Wang Tianzong's death. Some people were eager for Wang Tianzong's victory. In the strong expectation, Wang Tianzong took a step forward. "Why don't you draw your sword?" He looked at Lin Fengting and asked emotionlessly. Lin Fengting looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. The silver falling star was in his hand, but he did not raise it. All his emotions seemed to be completely restrained, but there was extreme bitterness in the depths of his eyes. Wang Tianzong's eyes became slightly gentle. "When we were young, I told you that you were indecisive and unable to learn how to refuse most of the time. You were destined to be unable to achieve great things." Wang Tianzong whispered. Lin Fengting smiled, extremely free and at ease. Behind the calmness, the real patriarch of the Lin clan seemed to be recovering little by little. He was indifferent and calm. "I don't expect to do anything great. The Lin clan hides from the world. It's enough to protect the achievements of our ancestors. But you didn't hide from the world today. You appeared here." Wang Tianzong looked at him with some regret. Lin Fengting was silent for a long time. He suddenly thought of more than 20 years after the collapse of the Li family. The Li family collapsed in the hands of the Wang family of Beihai. Lin Fengting naturally had complaints in his heart. He and Wang Tianzong met very few times, but every time they met, Wang Tianzong would definitely say those words when they talked about the past. He understood, but he still couldn't understand these 4 words. Now in retrospect, those 4 words were so clear that he could empathize with them. He smiled bitterly. "I can't help it." This was his answer, and it was also the answer that Wang Tianzong once gave him. There was a touch of understanding in Wang Tianzong's eyes. He didn't quite understand the meaning of this word. People in Jianghu. Involuntarily often meant irreparable. He smiled and whispered, "So don't blame me." Lin Fengting looked at him and didn't speak. Wang Tianzong's gaze was shifting. His gaze fell on Li Shi. The cold wind blew her hair into a mess, and her white dress danced in the wind. She held Blue Sky Underworld in her hand, so proud and so cold. Wang Tianzong's eyes were in a trance for a moment. For more than 20 years, he had hardly seen Li Shi. From the Li family to Kunlun City, thousands of miles away, she seemed to have completely frozen her heart. After the battle that year, all her pride and reserve seemed to be completely broken. She imprisoned herself in Kunlun City for more than 20 years, almost like a prison. And now, in the final battle of Eastern Europe, she held Blue Sky Underworld in her strongest state, and was trying her best to piece together the appearance of that year. Wang Tianzong thought of that year. When he saw Li Shi for the first time, he seemed to be attending a dinner party with Li Kuangtu in Yuzhou. That night, because of Bai Qingqian, Dongqing Wudi, who was also young, almost fought with Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu seemed to have suffered a small loss. Then at the end of the dinner party they saw Li Shi. Li Shi, who was dressed up for the first time, was dazzling and almost suppressed all the light of the same sex. Wang Tianzong thought quietly. At that time, Li Guangtu seemed to want to bet with Wang Tianzong on how long it would take to win this woman. How did he answer at that time? 3 days? Or a week? As a result, the next morning Li Guangtu, with an ambiguous fragrance, appeared in front of him with Li Shi and left him 2 words. Done. Time flew by in a hurry. Wang Tianzong's greatest impression of Li Shi seemed to be her arrogant and reserved appearance in those days. It's really pitiful. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Shi and said, Now you want to get back to what you used to be. Do you regret that sword stroke? Li Shi suddenly held blue sky underworld in her hand, looked at Wang Tianzong, and did not speak. You have a weak mind and are capricious. Even if a woman like you has the strength, what can you do? You only have yourself to blame for your tragedy. Wang Tianzong continued. This is my own choice. Li Shi's tone was indifferent. So you have been making wrong choices all your life. You chose to help him, but Gu Xingyan hoped that you would kill him. When the Li family was the young madam, you helped Kunlun City. Now you are the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, and you want to help the Li family? What are you struggling for? Li Shi trembled slightly and gritted her teeth without saying a word. Gu Xingyan is also a good-for-nothing. Don't blame me for always looking down on him. By chance he stole a high position, complacent and blindly self-abased. With his aptitude, in fact he could have broken through to the peak of the invincible realm a few years ago, and you are part of his inner demon. After being a dog for a long time, people don't know how to be a man. Kunlun City is the dog of the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. He overthrew the Li family, but he thinks that he has always been inferior to the Li family. He is really stupid and incurable. He took another step forward and looked at Li Guangtu. You have been stubborn all your life. You can achieve great things, but you can also ruin great things. When I was young, my father told you, but you didn't listen. Now it seems that you have ups and downs, and in the end, you still lost. He did not make any formal evaluation but just said lightly, You are not as good as me. He commented on the heroes of the world in a tense situation. Indecisive, capricious, stupid and good for nothing. You are not as good as me. His words were to the point and made people speechless. The extremely dark light flowed in Li Guangtu's hand and turned into a dark long sword. Li Guangtu held Shadow Ripper tightly and walked to Lin Fengting. I can still fight, he said quietly. If he could fight, he would not lose. Wang Tianzong said yes again. You can fight together. The night wind blew the ancient costume on his body. The robe had big sleeves, and on the black cloth, there were traces of golden lines shining with golden light. Wang Tianzong's body began to rise. It's all under my feet. His voice sounded, resounding through heaven and earth, extremely majestic. Lin Fengting naturally raised his head and looked up at Wang Tianzong, who was getting higher and higher. I won't blame you. His arms were moving. The falling stars, shining with silver sharpness, rose little by little and pointed to the sky. No matter what happens today, I hope you won't blame me in the future. Wang Tianzong's body was still rising. Slowly, the endless darkness in the sky gathered toward him wildly. The space was pulled into a cyclone. The wind was not moving forward, and the messy airflow seemed to have lost its direction, turning and circulating in the broken space. The torn space spread all the way. In the nearest place to another block, a team of Samsara Palace elites who were confronting the Polar Ground Alliance suddenly exploded. The blood did not rise or fall, but floated in the air and gradually disappeared. The torn space continued to spread. This time, the supreme sword energy really permeated the whole city. It could be said that the unprecedented sword intent flew over the ruins of the city, rushed out of the wilderness, and went deep into the sea. The glaciers outside the city began to tear and collapse. The calm sea suddenly raised wild waves, rushing and roaring. The white mist in the manor finally stopped gathering toward Li Tianlan. The white mist, which represented vitality, became chaotic and began to evaporate. Finally, it flew toward the other end of the night sky. A vast expanse of whiteness perfectly integrated into Wang Tianzong's sword energy and gathered on him. Wang Tianzong's figure stopped in the sky. At this moment, There was really no opponent in front of him. Army, murderous weapon, peak of the invincible realm, half-step chosen one. The city, the ruins, the vast wilderness, the glacier ocean. They were all under his feet. He looked down. The blue sky underworld spring drew a streak of green light below. The endless darkness surged up with sharp and powerful sword intent. Lin Fengting raised the long sword in his hand. There was a sudden buzzing sound between heaven and earth. Lin Fengting's figure disappeared. A ray of silver sharpness rose to the sky in an instant. The extremely bright silver light was blooming with all its strength. Thousands of rays of sharpness continued to spread toward the sky. In the blink of an eye, the silver light became one. A large expanse of silver light surged and surged. Countless starlight seemed to all light up. The dead city, which was constantly torn apart in the sword energy, became vivid. The extreme silver light went straight up. Through the broken space. Through Wang Tianzong's sword energy. Through the enormous pressure in the void. Up. It was invincible and invincible. The silver light was stretching all over the eyes. From the ground to the sky. It was vast and mighty, like a Milky Way across the sky, flying with indomitable sword intent. The man and the sword became one. At this moment, Lin Fengting had become a ray of sword light. Wherever the sword light passed, even the chosen one's sword intent could not stop it. Broken. Everything was completely broken in the sword light. In Wang Tianzong's domain, which was covered with endless sword intent, a very obvious gap appeared as the silver light passed. The sword light rushed over, shining like stars and shining on the whole city. In an instant, the whole world seemed to be broken. For many years, too many years, even for his whole life. This was the first time that Lin Fengting had fought with all his strength, without any reservation. His sword light was incomparably majestic, with love, chic, and determination. It was incomparably soaring. This was a sword of true feelings. This was an indomitable sword. The endless darkness was completely illuminated by the silver light. All the sharpness seemed to converge in the silver light, all the way up. 24 moves of sword. This was Lin Fengting's own 24 moves of sword. Break of reincarnation. The silver light illuminated the long night, and appeared in front of Wang Tianzong with the most dazzling sharpness. Wang Tianzong could no longer see Lin Fengting. The incomparably dazzling sword light was mighty. Wang Tianzong was expressionless. This could be said to be the strongest sword move he had ever seen in his life. This could also be said to be one of the strongest opponents he had ever encountered in his life. At this moment, Lin Fengting indeed surpassed Li Guangtu at his peak. He was even infinitely close to the tribulation at the last moment. Wang Tianzong took a step forward. There was nothing in front of him. The world was quiet. In reality and illusion, only day and night were alternating. There was no opponent or sword light in his eyes. He stretched out his palm. Ding! In a collision sound that resounded through the sky, Wang Tianzong's body suddenly shook for a moment. Blood flowed from his palm. His face turned slightly pale for a moment, and then returned to normal. The silver sword light, like the vast Yangtze River, completely disappeared. Lin Fengting, with a pale face, appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's 2 fingers clamped the blade of falling stars. Blood dripped from Wang Tianzong's fingers, and turned into sword energy all over the sky. Wang Tianzong looked at Lin Fengting. It's really not enough. Wang Tianzong looked at Lin Fengting. You still don't understand. In this realm, sword energy and sword intent are meaningless. His fingers exerted a little force. The incomparably solid blade of falling stars was obviously bent. Wang Tianzong's voice rang in Lin Fengting's ear. In my realm. Bang. The tip of the sword of falling stars was broken by Wang Tianzong's 2 fingers. His voice kept echoing, majestic and unparalleled, like a god. This is heaven and earth. Blood spurted from Lin Fengting's mouth. Countless sword energy between heaven and earth suppressed him. His body was covered with blood, and he fell madly. Li Guangtu, who was no longer in his peak state, and Li Shi, who was a little weaker, rushed up along the trajectory of Lin Fengting's sword light. That silver light had evaporated everything. At this moment, there was no obstacle on their way forward, only their own sword intent. The sword light filled with dark shadows was getting deeper and deeper. It was also the 24 moves of sword. It was also the broken reincarnation. But this sword had a completely different flavor from Lin Fengting's. Li Guangtu's sword light was going up, paranoid and crazy. The infinite blue light had been completely replaced by the bright sword light. Li Shi's mouth was already bleeding. She desperately broke out her own speed. And all the sword energy and sword intent had been completely condensed. She approached Li Guangtu. The shining sword light fused with the deep darkness. It was the same 24 moves of sword. The current sword light, the current sharpness, and the current dazzle all came from the man beside her. Now, just give it back to him. This was the real sword light of the same origin. The sword energy, sword intent, and sword momentum were even exactly the same. Li Guangtu kept moving forward. Every strand of his hair fluttered, and his eyes were shining. The dual swords combination. In an instant, the two sword energy of the same origin merged into one, and a large piece of sword energy belonging to Wang Tianzong was broken. The starlight in the silent sky dimmed again, and the silver light began to disappear. But the endless thunder filled the sky in an instant. The thunder shook the sky and the sea, illuminating the whole city. Below Li Guangtu, Li Shi opened the 10th unique domain. Li Guangtu's figure appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong was looking at him. His eyes were still calm. In his sight, the strongest man in hundreds of years raised his palm. He clenched his fist. He waved his fist. The thunder disappeared. The extremely violent power that could almost sweep everything spread in an instant. The dual swords combination? The broken reincarnation? All the sword light was completely destroyed in the power of the raging sea. Wang Tianzong's wide sleeves fluttered in the air, and the huge power drowned Li Guangtu, Li Shi, Shadow the Ripper, and Blue Sky Underworld. All the sword light and thunder disappeared completely. Only the blood kept flowing. Wang Tianzong, whose eyes were condensed to the extreme, punched again. The sound of the explosion in the space could be heard clearly. The figures of Li Guangtu and Li Shi suddenly fell. Their bodies hit the ground hard. And the sound of bones breaking was clear and detailed. Li Guangtu's body sank into the ground, and his eyes were a little blurred. Li Shi was also covered in blood, but she still tried to stand up and move closer to Li Guangtu. The sword energy surged between heaven and earth. Wang Tianzong stood in the air. It was heaven and earth. The almost endless white mist in the manor in the distance gathered toward him wildly, extremely excited. His aura was slightly weaker, but the sword energy all over his body was stronger, even more than before. It was irresistible. This was the chosen one in the most perfect state. There was no flaw. Lin Fengting stood up with the broken sword, and looked at Wang Tianzong calmly. Li Guangtu's eyes were wild. He roared in a low voice and got up from the ground little by little. Li Shi wanted to help him, but he shook her off directly. Li Shi, who was covered in blood, looked pale, but she still said softly, "I can still fight." Li Guangtu laughed wildly. He raised his hand slightly. The Shadow the Ripper, which fell to the ground, fell into his hand. He looked up at Wang Tianzong in the air, and his eyes were completely blood red. Kill. His figure rushed to the sky, and the majestic sword intent was gathering. It gathered into the Shadow the Ripper. All the power flowed out of every drop of his blood and gathered into the sword. The Shadow the Ripper came to life. Countless dark rays of light suddenly erupted, accompanied by silver light and dark green light. In an instant, blue sky underworld and falling stars lit up at the same time. The power with obvious destruction was rising. The three murderous weapons in the charging period could not be fired. But it did not mean that they could not self-destruct. Li Guangtu, who had no way to retreat, roared wildly and barely activated the murderous weapons with the strongest sword energy. The world was full of the will of resistance, which was the will of the murderous weapons. But Li Guangtu ignored it. Li Shi ignored it. Lin Fengting also ignored it. The strongest sword light of the three people activated the murderous weapons. All the quiet space above the sky began to turn over completely. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. Three murderous weapons. The three masters rushed over at the same time. This was a full blow from them at the same time. This was also a full blow from the 3 murderous weapons at the same time. An earth-shattering bang suddenly sounded in the turbulent sky. Countless rays of light exploded along with the sword energy. The huge destructive power was destroying everything. All the power swallowed Wang Tianzong's body completely in an instant. The huge and unimaginable power kept surging. There was already chaos in the sky. Lin Fengting fell to the ground and could barely stand. Li Guangtu and Li Shi had fallen. They raised their heads at the same time and looked at the sky. Bang! An incomparably loud heartbeat sounded in the chaotic explosion. Bang, bang, bang. It was a clear, powerful, and steady heartbeat. The explosion, which seemed to be short and long, finally passed. The night sky became calm. Wang Tianzong's figure appeared in front of everyone. The black and gold ancient costume was still fluttering, his hair was not messy, and the long sword was not unsheathed. His eyes calmly and pitifully swept over the 3 people on the ground, and he said faintly, "Is it useful?" At this moment, even Lin Fengting, who had been calm, showed a trace of despair in his eyes. No one had ever seen the Chosen One. So no one knew how powerful the perfect Chosen One was. And no one would know what the so-called absolute dominance and the so-called sweeping across the dark world meant. Until this moment, the truth was completely revealed. It was so cold and cruel. Their strongest blow, the strongest blow of the murderous weapons, and all their means had been exhausted. Wang Tianzong didn't even show any weakness. From beginning to end he defeated Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu, Li Shi and destroyed 3 murderous weapons. Wang Tianzong didn't even draw his sword. He hadn't drawn his sword yet. The most important thing, and also the most despairing thing, was that this Chosen One came from the Wang family of Beihai. At this moment, the strength of the Wang family of Beihai was secondary. What mattered was that this family had a potion that everyone in the world was eager for. Immortality potion. Wang Tianzong must have immortality potion. And it was immortality potion that could completely recover all injuries and return to the peak state in an instant after activation. And now, Wang Tianzong hadn't been injured yet. He just stood in the air. It was plain and simple. The surrounding world was full of his sword intent. He was heaven and earth. This world was his sword. It was irresistible. Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on Li Guangtu again. "You won't die so easily," he whispered. "Tonight's battle so far is just between you and me, not the conquest of the Wang family of Beihai. But now it seems," he smiled. The thick white mist came from a distance and merged into his body. His aura began to rise little by little and return to the peak. "You don't have many trump cards." He waved to Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu's body flew up without any struggle. Lin Fengting wanted to stop it. As soon as his body moved, the sword intent pressed over and made his whole body bloody again. Li Shi moved, but she had no strength. Li Guangtu's body was pulled into the sky. Wang Tianzong clutched his neck tightly. Li Guangtu closed his eyes motionlessly. His expression was calm, as if he had already accepted his fate. The light lit up in Wang Tianzong's hand and shone on Li Guangtu. It was extremely bright. "The whole world should see your embarrassment and downfall," Wang Tianzong muttered to himself, and his palm kept exerting force. The whole world was watching Li Guangtu's embarrassment and downfall. Li Tianlan could see it too. The white mist in the manor had dissipated a lot. In the confinement of the 10th unique domain, Li Tianlan quietly watched the light shining on Li Guangtu. The master of Samsara Palace was also watching. She turned her back to Li Tianlan until a voice sounded behind her. "The people of the Li family shouldn't bear these." The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Li Tianlan. "But you can't change anything now. You still won't let me go?" Li Tianlan looked at the master of Samsara Palace. "Does it make sense?" the master of Samsara Palace asked. "I don't know." Li Tianlan's voice calmed down. "I don't know if it makes sense to go there now, and I don't know if it makes sense to come here from Reki City. But no matter whether it makes sense or not, I have to go there, just like I have to come here. You can't stop me, and no one can stop me." He looked at the master of Samsara Palace, and his voice gradually softened. "I take back what I said just now. I'm willing to apologize." Mr. Lin is right and so are you. I'm indeed a jerk, and you're not that. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace and smiled calmly. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly became uneasy. What do you want to do? Thank you for everything you have done for me. I never knew that anyone would be so kind to me except them. Li Tianlan said softly. There was even a moment when I thought you were my mother. Ha, thank you, thank you. Don't be impulsive, Tianlan, listen to me. The master of Samsara Palace sounded a little panicked. I won't. Li Tianlan said softly. I said no one can stop me, not even you, unless I die. Countless violent sword chi surged out of his body, constantly stirring up the surrounding 10th unique domain. The 10th unique domain felt threatened and suddenly fought back. In an instant, Li Tianlan was already covered in blood. His bones were cracking under the suppression of the domain, and they were about to break. The master of Samsara Palace suddenly screamed and directly withdrew the domain around him. Li Tianlan fell to the ground and laughed, feeling a little sad. He had just given his life to the 10th unique domain. The master of Samsara Palace didn't want him to die, so she could only withdraw the domain. He stood up shakily, walked past the master of Samsara Palace, and whispered, thank you so much. Tianlan. His footsteps were striding away. A pair of extremely soft arms directly hugged his legs. Li Tianlan's face changed dramatically, and his body suddenly became extremely stiff. The master of Samsara Palace knelt down. She knelt beside Li Tianlan's legs. This was the master of Samsara Palace. She once overlooked the whole dark world, set off the chaos in Eastern Europe, and planned everything today. She stood at the peak of the invincible realm, and the peak of the dark world. At this moment, she knelt at Li Tianlan's feet, holding his thighs tightly with both hands. And her voice was a little chaotic with a slight buzz. She sounded like she was crying. Please don't go. I can solve all this. I can. Don't go. The master of Samsara Palace's voice trembled. You can't solve it. Li Tianlan whispered. Now Wang Tianzong is completely unsolvable. I don't want to see them die, and I don't want to see you die. Li Tianlan looked at the flash in the distant sky. I don't know what I can do, but if all this is planned by you, and it's all because of me, he said quietly, I'll go over and exchange for him. He thought of what deity had said. The Li family. It was his Li family. So be it. He broke free from the arms of the master of Samsara Palace little by little and whispered, I'm sorry. Thank you. He took a step forward. Tianlan. The master of Samsara Palace's voice trembled and gradually became calm. Li Tianlan turned to look at her. You'll die. The master of Samsara Palace whispered. If you go there, you'll definitely die. Li Tianlan didn't say anything. After you die, you'll never see me, little Bai, or Rushi again. The master of Samsara Palace continued. Dongqing Rushi's confused face changed, and she subconsciously stood in front of Li Tianlan to stop him. Do you really want to go? The master of Samsara Palace asked. Li Tianlan didn't hesitate and nodded. Go. After all, she couldn't stop him. The master of Samsara Palace's eyes were in a trance, as if she thought of the interception many years ago. There were some things, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't stop them. Okay, she said softly. I'll let you go. Before you die. She opened her hands, and her voice trembled and gradually became numb and dead. Hold me. Li Tianlan hesitated for a moment. The master of Samsara Palace opened her hands and waited quietly. Li Tianlan walked over hesitantly, and reached out to hold the master of Samsara Palace in his arms. Her figure was very tall. To be exact, she just held him, not in his arms. The master of Samsara Palace held him tightly with both hands and breathed in his scent greedily. Li Tianlan, who had killed all the way, was full of the smell of blood. Amidst the pungent smell, she was like a traveler searching for a drop of water in the desert, desperately searching for that familiar smell. It was a warm and reassuring smell. The master of Samsara Palace closed her eyes. Her expression was extremely calm and stiff. But she couldn't stop the tears from flowing down from her eyes. She trembled slightly and kept taking deep breaths. Why do you have to go? She asked softly, and her voice was like a murmur. Li Tianlan's body was a little stiff. There are always some things that have to be done. He paused and laughed at himself. Even if I can't do anything. If I can't do anything, it'll be fine if I don't do it? The master of Samsara Palace murmured, and her tears flowed faster. Li Tianlan was silent and didn't speak. He subconsciously held the master of Samsara Palace tightly. A familiar fragrance that seemed to seep into the soul came over. It was so strong, so natural, so nostalgic. The smell was right in front of him. Right in front of him. Li Tianlan suddenly opened his eyes. Qin Weibai appeared behind him. Li Tianlan's brain was in a mess for a moment. Before he could figure it out, the master of Samsara Palace held him and whispered something. At this moment, Li Tianlan didn't hear clearly what she said. But the unparalleled pain filled his body in an instant, spreading from his chest and making him completely stiff. A knife appeared in the master of Samsara Palace's hand. The sharp blade reflected the cold light. It was extremely sharp and hard, and it pierced through his chest in an instant. It was penetrated from front to back. The sword intent burst out of his body. His body fell to the ground softly. The master of Samsara Palace held the knife and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Li Tianlan looked into her eyes. At this moment, his brain was blank, and the pain was heart-wrenching. He finally heard what the master of Samsara Palace said. 3 simple words. Clear, fleeting, numb and dead silent. In the sound of blood flowing, the 3 words seemed to float from the sky and fall into the depths of his heart. I'm sorry. Chapter 600. When the storm of sword energy engulfed the whole city of Mormons, Jiang Shangyu's figure appeared in a small town not far from Mormons. The town was small, but its location was very clever. It faced the sea in the north, the mountains in the south, and Mormons in the west. A newly built road ran through the town, and the layout was simple and grand. There was a church on the main road in the middle of the town. Jiang Shangyu, who was drunk all over, still carried the flagon. He walked to the bell tower of the church and sat down. Looking ahead, he thought about the next negotiation and waited quietly. Occasionally, he took a sip of the liquor. He was very restrained when he drank. His initial drunkenness had already been dispelled by the deep cold wind. He looked into the distance of the road with exceptional patience. The army of the snow country had retreated, but not in this direction. In terms of terrain, this was the best way to enter Mormons for all the forces who wanted to enter last. It could even be said to be the only way. After all, even if the Snow Empire retreated, it was still an army of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. The reason why they entered the battlefield last was to preserve their strength. No one was willing to collide with those defeated soldiers. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu firmly believed that he could wait for the person he was waiting for. Luxing Sangchuan had left, and Jiang Shangyu didn't care where he was going. At this point of the final battle, the Sword Sage of East Island had been away for too long, and the elites of Jifeng Sword Training School must have been wiped out. Without worries, Luxing Sangchuan naturally had no reason to fight desperately, but Mormon still had to go. Jiang Shangyu quietly thought about the current situation. This day was the end of this era. It was also the beginning of the decline of the Dark World. In the wilderness, Jiang Shangyu couldn't see the final result. No one could. But presumably, after this day, the experts of the Invincible Realm, and even the Thundershocking Realm would become extremely important. Luxing Sangchuan was a good move. Nearly half of the elites of the Jifeng Sword Training School had won Li Guangtu's trust and made him stay in Mormons with hope. The Jifeng Sword Training School had played its full role, but Luxing Sangchuan still had a task. He still had to return to Mormons. He didn't enter the battlefield to participate in the battle. Instead, he quietly laid an ambush. At the moment when the Sword Sage of East Island would become the endgame, there was an absolute variable. The night wind blew past. Jiang Shangyu turned with the wind and looked in the direction of Mormons. It meant that the sword light at the peak of this era was supreme and swept everything. Jiang Shangyu gently smiled and muttered to himself. Jiang Shangyu, will you die? His calm eyes gradually became fierce. How can you live? He poured the liquor into his mouth and wiped his mouth. Go to hell, all of you. Shangyu was stunned. In the cold wind, Jiang Shangyu took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. After answering the call, he smiled and said, Dad. Jiangshan Jiang said. Jiangshan's in snow country. Jiang mountain. He country in the inn and mountain in Li. It was not until the next day that Jiangshan got in touch with his son. These days he had been paying attention to the situation in snow country all the time. He was one of the youngest invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou State, the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps. All of this sounded the same, but under the general trend, the invincible realm experts were like non-entities. The chaos in Eastern Europe had spread to this day, and more than half of the experts on the divine list and the holy list in the dark world had died. What could the so-called invincible realm experts do if they participated in it? Snow country has retreated. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a while and laughed. Marshal Dongqing is very powerful. Without snow country, the scale of the war will be reduced, but it will be more tragic. But it has nothing to do with me. His smile was relaxed and soft. Dad, don't worry. I'm not going to the battlefield. I'm still far away from Mormons. Just watch. He continued to look ahead. A car's headlights appeared in the distance. The car light shone over and kept shining in the darkness. Dad, I'll be back in the near future. Jiang Shangyu's expression became more and more satisfied. He had waited for the person he wanted. Everything was perfect. I'm going to meet a very important person now. I'll hang up first. Jiang Shan sighed and hung up the phone. Jiang Shangyu drank the last sip of wine, tightened his clothes, jumped down the bell tower, and walked toward the car lights in front of him. The car lights were getting closer and closer. It was a small convoy, with at most a few hundred people. Dozens of cars seemed to be covered with dust because of the long journey. They drove into the main street of the town, and did not slow down at all. They rushed all the way to Mormons at the fastest speed. Whether it was the scale or anything else, it was in line with Jiang Shangyu's expectations. So he was completely relieved. He walked to the middle of the street and stopped in front of the motorcade. The dazzling car lights suddenly shone over. Jiang Shangyu chuckled and bowed slightly to show his respect. The sound of brakes rang out. The off-road vehicle at the front stopped when it was about to hit Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu kept his bowing posture and did not move. The door opened. Heavy footsteps stepped on the ground. An extremely hoarse voice sounded. Who are you? Jiang Shangyu raised his head in surprise. In the dazzling light, he could not see who the other party was. He could only feel a general outline. But in his impression and intelligence, there should not be such a person who was qualified to be the first car. Jiang Shangyu. A voice suddenly rang out. It was elegant, feminine, unhurried and calm. His voice carried a hint of laughter and coldness. How rare. Jiang Shangyu frowned. The headlights in front went out. A tall young man opened the door and got out of the car. He stood in front of Jiang Shangyu. The young man was dressed in a hunting suit and looked handsome. His aura was too feminine, even cold. He was like a poisonous snake lurking in a damp forest. He seemed to know that his temperament was a little inappropriate, so he kept a beard on his upper lip, which made him more or less masculine. He was almost half a head taller than Jiang Shangyu. He walked up to Jiang Shangyu, and his every move was extremely cold and domineering. In the face of the new vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps in Zhongzhou State, who had the combat capability of the invincible realm, the young man lowered his head slightly. His tone was full of condescending mockery. I didn't expect to see you here. You dare to stop my car. What are you going to do? Jiang Shangyu looked at the young man in front of him and fell silent. He could not say that he was sorry and that he had recognized the wrong person. But he did wait for the wrong person, and he was ridiculously wrong. He knew the young man in front of him. There were not many people in the dark world who did not know him. Before Di Jiang of the Wang family of Beihai was frozen, and Li Tianlan established a new martial arts and became a marshal, the young man in front of him had always been recognized as the #1 expert of the young generation in the dark world. He was the #1 expert of the young generation in the entire dark world. The young patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, with the combat capability of the invincible realm, Jiang Guochu. After Jiang Qiansong disappeared and was expelled from the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Guochu had now officially become the patriarch of the Jiang family of South America. It seemed that as early as a few years ago, he had the strength to enter the invincible realm at any time. However, in order to achieve higher achievements in the future, he had been suppressing himself and had not broken through. Jiang Shangyu blinked, sighed softly and said helplessly, "Why are you here?" Jiang Guochu raised his eyebrows. Before he spoke, he suddenly looked up. Jiang Shangyu raised his head almost at the same time as him and looked in the direction of Mormons. In Yi Futian's sight, the storm of sword intent that stirred up heaven and earth suddenly spread over here. It was the most natural spread. Countless sword intents poured into the plains and into the ocean. The huge sound of tides instantly shook and surged up to the sky. The glaciers were torn apart. In that truly invincible sword chi, the world became extremely gloomy. The bright silver light cut through the sky and moved forward in the matchless sword intent, shattering the sky. The dark light was rising with the thunder. The green light flashed high in the sky. The double sword harmony. Jiang Shangyu's expression became a little stiff, a little stunned, and then became gloomy and cold. The double sword harmony. Li Kuangtu. The shadow was torn. Blue sky underworld. The double sword harmony. The sword light was too familiar to him. He did not expect that the person he was waiting for did not appear. Instead, he arrived at Mormon's first. The person who should not have come appeared in front of him and made trouble for him. What was this? His eyes were fixed on the green light in the distant sky. The green light was rising. Vaguely, he seemed to see the domain of the 10th unique domain. It's really you. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were a little complicated. Why did you make a different choice from that year? He was silent and did not speak for a long time. He came here to wait for Li Shi and the convoy of Kunlun City. In that huge plan, Li Shi was an indispensable and the most critical part. If there was no accident tonight, it would be the first step for him to get in touch with Li Shi, just like how he got in touch with Jifeng Sword Training School for the first time in East Island more than 3 years ago. But Li Shi did not appear here. Instead, she appeared in Mormon's. He and Li Kuangtu's double sword harmony. This also meant that he put down everything. It didn't matter how the elites of Kunlun City were. What mattered was that if Li Shi traveled alone, this place was naturally no longer a necessary place. He shook his head and sighed softly. Mormon's is very lively. Jiang Guochu glanced thoughtfully into the distance. He looked at Jiang Shangyu with a playful expression. Why, do you have anything to say? No. Jiang Shangyu shook his head and turned around. Goodbye. You stopped my convoy and wasted my time. You should pay the price. Jiang Guochu looked at Jiang Shangyu and smiled a little ferociously. One of the future heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State? I really didn't expect that you would take the initiative to come to me. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him and said slowly, I'm in a bad mood now. He turned around little by little. It's really bad. To be exact, it's a little bad. He took a step forward. Do you want to be my punching bag? Jiang Guochu's eyes suddenly froze and he shouted, Kill him. Boom. An earth-shattering explosion suddenly broke out in the quiet town. Countless lights flickered wildly in the fire. A series of screams sounded for a moment, and then disappeared in an instant. In the countless fires and explosions, a tall figure turned around and fled without hesitation. One of his hands had completely drooped, and he ran in an extremely embarrassing way. Jiang Shangyu stood where he was and looked at the direction of the other party's escape in the burning fire. He was silent for a long time with no expression on his face. The corpses belonging to the Jiang family of South America on the ground burned for a long time. Jiang Shangyu slowly turned around on the road in the town, looked in the direction of Mormon's, and muttered to himself, It's a clear sky. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 601. The white mist surged toward the distance. Indistinctly, chaotic noises penetrated the mist and became clearer and clearer. The blood-stained blade was pulled out of his chest bit by bit. In the heart-wrenching pain, no words could describe Li Tianlan's inner feelings. He fell to the ground, and the blood spread on the ground. He looked at the master of Samsara Palace blankly, and no one knew what he was thinking. This strike was vicious and precise. The blade almost penetrated his heart. The sword energy destroyed the inside of his body. It was not fatal, but it caused Li Tianlan a very serious injury in an instant. Even with the help of the dragon vein, it would take at least half a month to recover from such an injury. It might not be a long time, but it also meant that the next battle had nothing to do with him. He lay quietly on the ground. Blood flowed out of his body, and his body began to become cold. Dongqing Rushi, who was one step faster than Qin Weibai, carefully held him in her arms. She raised her head and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. Her eyes, which used to be clear and blank, suddenly became as sharp as a knife. The ancient famous sword of Jade Pool, Silence, trembled violently on her back. The violent sword energy surged and gathered, and the white mist was vast and mighty. The strong killing intent completely locked on the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace was indifferent. She stood there quietly and looked at Li Tianlan's eyes. There was no emotion in Li Tianlan's eyes. They seemed to be looking at each other, but his pupils had no focus, only blankness. It was the most thorough numbness and silence. The cold wind blew far away with the surging white mist. Unparalleled luck and vitality began to gather toward Wang Tianzong. The eyes of the master of Samsara Palace also became numb and silent. Everything she loved, the whole world, was empty in an instant. It was blank. She didn't know how long she stood there. Her complicated thoughts seemed to stretch time infinitely. Thousands of years, the previous life, the present life, the entanglement of gratitude and hatred, love, hatred, hate, and madness. The boundless white snow and sword light seemed to have drifted over from another world, covering and completely enveloping her. She stood there as if she had lost her soul, leaving only an extremely cold and desperate body. "I'm sorry." She finally spoke again. She still had thousands of words and countless secrets that she hadn't shared with him. Sparkling tears fell and froze on the ground. She had so many things to say, but when the words reached her mouth, they became the most ordinary words. "Sorry." Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The world in front of him darkened. The darkness gradually surged over. His eyelids became heavier and heavier, but he refused to close them. He only looked at him quietly. There was no hatred, no anger, no confusion. He just watched with a despairing calmness. "Why?" Dongqing Rushi's voice suddenly sounded. The master of Samsara Palace glanced at her, and then at Qin Weibai. There was an unconcealable envy and absent-mindedness in her eyes. She took a step back. "After tonight, take him back to Zhongzhou State." She stepped back gently, but her eyes were fixed on Li Tianlan. "From now on, take good care of him." Dongqing Rushi's eyes were still sharp. Instinctively, she stood up and reached out to tug at her sleeves. Dongqing Rushi turned her head and glanced at her. Qin Weibai shook her head at her. Her face was pale. Looking at the master of Samsara Palace who was quietly stepping back, her eyes were full of heartache. The master of Samsara Palace, who was dressed in black and looked a little bloated, gradually disappeared in the white mist. His voice sounded in the white mist. "Come out." Light footsteps stepped on the soft grass. A middle-aged man with meticulous clothes and appearance walked out of the white mist. A dazzling golden light spread out under his feet. His eyes were blank, but the golden light was extremely bright. The pale golden light seemed to cover the entire sky above the manor, completely enveloping every corner of the manor. "Jiang Qiansong." Dongqing Rushi's voice suddenly lowered. The golden light and the man in front of her didn't hide at all. This was the 30-meter mortal world, known as the domain with the strongest defense in the dark world. What appeared in front of her was the former patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, who was wanted by Wulan State after being expelled from the Jiang family of South America, and had been missing for a while. Jiang Qiansong looked at Dongqing Rushi indifferently. His domain was still spreading, condensing, and protecting the entire manor. Qin Weibai skillfully applied medicine to Li Tianlan's bleeding. She carefully bandaged the hideous wound and said softly, "He is not an enemy now, and he won't be for the time being." Dongqing Rushi was in a daze. Jiang Qiansong in front of her was not only an enemy, but also the most competent bodyguard. He, who was known as the best in the world in defense, was almost the greatest protection of this manor. She suddenly felt a little pain. The subtle pain went deep into her mind little by little. She looked at Jiang Qiansong's eyes full of confusion and murmured to herself, "What's going on?" Li Tianlan looked at the direction in which the master of Samsara Palace left quietly. His will kept struggling. The boundless darkness swallowed him up. He closed his eyes and fell into a coma. Qin Weibai hesitated and whispered. The palace master suppressed Jiang Qiansong's will and created a new personality in his body. Dongqing Rushi was about to speak when a dazzling light suddenly spread out in the thick white mist. Countless white mist disappeared completely in an instant. The manor, which had been shrouded in white mist in the battle, reappeared in Mormons. The chaotic fighting and noise covered it in an instant. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace had gone far away. The colorful light enveloped her. Her figure began to rise into the air and gradually went up. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world kept shining. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace silently broke through the so-called strongest defense domain in the dark world and disappeared in an instant. Qin Weibai raised her head, and her eyes were sad. From the day the Samsara Palace was established, there were countless plans, countless arrangements, countless sacrifices, countless transactions and compromises. They destroyed the night spirit, fought against Zhongzhou state, set off the final battle of Heaven Capital, and entered the chaos of Eastern Europe. The date of death, the trial day, the final day, everything had an end. The colorful light kept going up and blended into the night sky. Countless karma officially came to an end at this moment. No one could stop anything. The general trend rumbled and rolled forward. Boom! In the earth-shattering explosion, the blood-like scarlet light sounded as soon as the master of Samsara Palace disappeared, and the white mist disappeared. The noise of the war came from afar. The manor lost the protection of the white mist, and was directly surrounded the moment it reappeared in Mormons. No one could say for sure how long these people had been waiting, and no one knew how they found the location of this manor in the thick white fog. An incomparably ferocious attack came crashing over in an instant. Red light flashed, and someone was charging at the forefront with large strides. 6 people. Surrounding the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. The 6 people in the front rushed over at the fastest speed. Their clothes began to burn while they were running. Their clothes disappeared, and their flesh and blood were scorched in the sudden burning flame. Some reflective luster of metal flowed out. The pupils of the 6 people had completely turned blood red. The mighty energy burst out in an instant, and it was closely connected. It was almost an endless stream of red light. Dongqing Rushi held Li Tianlan gently, and her eyes were blank. Qin Weibai's heart suddenly sank. The clear red light and the mighty energy clearly proved the origin of the other party. The Wang family of Beihai. The Devil Troop. Behind the 6 devils were the most elite forces of the Beihai Corps, hundreds and thousands of them. The elite army kept a subtle distance from the devils and charged at the same time. At this moment, Qin Weibai finally remembered the conversation with the master of Samsara Palace when she was about to enter Mormons. In the countless simulations and deductions of the Samsara Palace, even if everything was perfect, their chips were always a little short. What the Samsara Palace wanted was not victory or defeat. There was no so-called winner in the chaos of Eastern Europe. What the Samsara Palace wanted was a new era in the wilderness, a new era in which Li Tianlan lived. They had Blue Sky Underworld, Shadow Ripper and Falling Stars. They had Lin Fengting, Li Guangtu and Jiang Qiansong. There was also a murderous weapon lurking in the city. The Devil Corps, the Xianyuan Sword Troop, the elites of the Wang family of Beihai, and the Lin clan. The 13th floor, the invincible sword Flaming Fire. Countless bargaining chips were prepared in an unusually ample manner. But it was still not enough. Today's Sword Emperor was truly invincible in the world, and there was only one chance to deal with him. In countless deductions and expectations, the final outcome was always a little short of what the Samsara Palace wanted. It was not much, but it was a crucial point. That was Li Tianlan's life and death. If Li Tianlan really appeared in Mormons, Protected by Jiang Qiansong's new personality, the strongest 30-meter mortal world was enough to block most of the dangers. But the Wang family of Beihai had the Devil Troop. Even if the self-explosion of the Devil Troop was not as powerful as the murderous weapon, it was not far behind. The answer given by the Master of Samsara Palace was that one group of the Devil Troop sent by the Beihai Corps to Eastern Europe had been destroyed, and the other group had no capital to perish together because of excessive energy consumption. But no one knew how many people there were in the Devil Troop of the Wang family of Beihai. What if Wang Tianzong was crazy enough to throw himself into the third group of the Devil Troop? The Master of Samsara Palace said that Jiang Qiansong could stop it. Qin Weibai never doubted it. Even at that time, she never doubted it. Her only doubt was who would stop the subsequent elites of the Wang family of Beihai, after Jiang Qiansong stopped the third group of the Devil Troop. At that time, the Master of Samsara Palace said that there was still a sword missing. A sword to make up for the difference. Qin Weibai did not know the specific meaning of this sentence at that time, nor did she understand which sword it was. But now, all the expectations had become reality. In front of her was the third group of the Devil Troop. At least 1,000 core elites of the Wang family of Beihai were mighty. Everything was happening. There was really a sword in front of Qin Weibai. The sword trembled violently, and the cracked scabbard was constantly cracking. The famous sword of Jade Pool. Silence. The red light all over the sky spread over. The first demon, who was burning all over, opened his hands. The scarlet light seemed to flow out of every pore of his body. His body leaped into the air, and without any hesitation he directly hit the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. With the blood mist, his body exploded in an instant, and the violent energy was released to the extreme in an instant. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world began to flash. The second demon rushed into the domain, and a large roar began to sound. Then there was the third person. Jiang Qiansong's body trembled violently. The roaring explosion brought an extremely violent heat wave. A large mouthful of blood spurted from his mouth. He knelt on the ground, still trying to maintain his domain. The fourth person. The fifth person. The sixth person. The red light obliterated everything. The continuous explosions happened in an instant. The extremely solid 30-meter mortal world was completely broken in an instant. The golden light and the red light rushed into the sky at the same time. The Devil Troop disappeared. A large number of core elites of the Beihai Corps rushed into the manor. It was a vast expanse. Endless chaos broke out in the manor. Flowers and plants were trampled to pieces, and the ground was sinking. The small number of elites of the Samsara and the Qin clan stationed in the manor had almost no room to resist in front of the core power of the Wang family of Beihai. Blood flowed freely. In the continuous roars and screams, the whole world became trance and reality. The silent sword was no longer trembling. Dongcheng Rushi held the hilt of the sword. She held Li Tianlan with one hand. Her black hair fell down and fell on his face. Dongcheng Rushi stared at Li Tianlan's face and murmured softly, "Tianlan, I love you very much." Countless people surged in, and their murderous intent soared to the sky. They were the strongest elites of the Beihai Corps. They were also abandoned by the Wang family of Beihai. Everything that could prove their identity and position, including the Devil Troop, had been completely destroyed. At the most suitable time, the Wang family of Beihai was exchanging pawns. They used the Devil Troop and the core elites of the Beihai Corps to exchange for Li Tianlan. The cracked scabbard of the silenced sword broke and fell to the ground little by little. With the sword intent of several invincible realm experts of Jade Pool, the sword shone brightly. Dongcheng Rushi held the sword and raised her hand. There was no hesitation, no choice. Her eyes were no longer confused. She was a little reluctant, but she was extremely determined. The sharp sound of a long sword being unsheathed suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. In the next second, the extremely misty and dreamy sword light rose to the sky and tore heaven and earth apart. The sword light enveloped Qin Weibai, Dongcheng Rushi, and Li Tianlan. In an instant, it devoured all the elites of the Beihai Corps. In the center of the city, everyone raised their heads and looked in the direction of the manor at the same time. Wang Tianzong took a deep look there and frowned. Li Guangtu, who was held in Wang Tianzong's hand, also felt the sword light and the sword intent. It seemed to be the most gorgeous color in the world, misty and dreamy, holy and ethereal. The unique skill of Jade Pool. The sword of heavenly flying fairy. That was also the sword that Dongqing Rushi once tried to draw the sword in Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, but she was forced back by him. Jade Pool was silent and finally unsheathed in the end of the dark. Of course he knew whose sword it was. Li Guangtu's eyes turned red in an instant. His eyes were scarlet red, and there was only madness left in them. Wang Tianzong! Wang Tianzong! Wang Tianzong! His hoarse roar shrouded the whole Mormons in an instant. The killing intent, which had reached the extreme, suddenly burst out along with the reckless sword light. The realm that was only one step away from the chosen one was shattered by him in an instant with great determination. The peak of the invincible realm. The invincible realm was stable. He had just entered the invincible realm. Half-step invincible realm. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Li Guangtu's realm retreated 1,000 miles, but the unprecedented sword energy covered the sky in an instant, and almost tore Wang Tianzong's sword light into pieces. Li Guangtu's scarlet eyes had lost all reason, only madness and ferocity. Wang Tianzong! The misty sword light dimmed and disappeared. In the extremely shrill scream, the 24 moves of sword and the 10th unique domain were completely integrated. There was no sword in Li Shi's hand. But in her hysterical resentment, she became the sharpest sword in the world. There was only sword light between heaven and earth. Li Guangtu was crazy. Li Shi was also crazy. When all the chips were thrown out, the two of them rushed to Wang Tianzong at the same time with their own lives as chips. Regardless of everything. Bookmark for easy reading. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.